So Dairy New South Wales, the kind of offerings that they're giving, one of the challenges with having somebody like me in a room is that everybody says, well, what's the outcome? What's the return? Best return for somebody standing at you in the front of the room is making you think. Because realistically, I'm only here for a small amount of time, or somebody like me is only here for a small amount of time, and you're returning to your businesses. So if after today you've stopped and thought about something, that's a great outcome. Rather than beating yourselves up that you didn't take away everything and implement it straight away. So I hear that all the time. People will say to me, you know, I heard everything you said, but the minute I went home, it went out the window. And they're very self-punishing because of that. That is a very, very harsh and unrealistic expectation from anybody. Okay? So I'll speak a lot today about learned behavior, about very ingrained learned behavior. When we want to change behavior, you need to do that during peace times. Okay? You can only embed good behavior in peace times. Under pressure, you will revert to what's normal. If you want to behave well under pressure, you need to have embedded those behaviors. Okay? So it's the theory of stress. We will revert to what's normal under pressure. And we know this from a large amount of military research. So if you think in the armed forces and you think about people being drilled hard in training, it's to make sure that they respond well in the most chaotic place you could possibly find yourself on the planet, a war zone. So a lot of stress theory comes from military. It also comes from elite sport. So there are many, many skills that we can use today. So once I get past this talking about stress is stressful. Okay? You will, just thinking about something that stresses you will actually bring up the same feelings and panic. So it's quite often in a room like this, I will see people really at the edge in terms of, you know, holding back tears, etc. Because when we think about previous experiences that have been stressful for us, we remember, the body and the brain remembers, keeps score and remembers those things. However, today is the first day of the rest of your life. So it's about using that information positively and solutions focused, rather than constantly looking backwards and thinking, oh, what if and if only. So moving away from regret and self-punishment and moving towards solutions focused and, you know, productivity, efficiency, sustainability. That's what we're looking at today. So that's basically looking at sustainable decision making and maximizing time. And of course, every time I speak about stress management, there's going to be a large element of time, because across all stressed people, regardless of what your stresses are, what is the common phrase that people will say when they're stressed? I don't have time. I don't have time. Where will I find the time for that? You don't find time. Time isn't buried out somewhere and the person knows where it is, so they go out and dig it up and they're really efficient and you're not. Okay? Time is the understanding of how you're using your own time. It's the ability to stop and say, is this the best use of my time right now? And how might this play out? Now that's rational decision making. Under stress and pressure, the vast majority of humans are not rational, they're emotional. So they'll act. Particularly in agriculture, where there is a proaction to action. People proactively act. And so there can be that after going, oh, why did I do that? Probably because you didn't stop for a moment. And it's literally a moment. So when we see really effective decision makers, when we see really effective, capable people who are doing what they need to do at any one time, it's because they just take a moment to stop, rather than falling into it. That moment could be the difference between making a life-changing positive decision and a life-changing, very destructive decision. So when we're looking at sustainability and resilience in terms of businesses and personal resilience, where we find somebody with that stop, think, then act, we're going to find somebody who's very capable and achieving a lot. The other difficult thing when we look at something like stress management and resilience is that people who you look at that are good at this are quite often good at it because they've been brought to the edge and they've decided that is not a place they want to go again. Now that is the school of hard knocks. That is a really, really tough way to learn. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to know that there are people, or to hear that there are people in this room or online who have been to that point. And just even thinking about it now is probably very stressful. So what we want to do is move away from that edge and not learn the hard way. We want to start implementing positive behaviors before we get to that point. The challenge is Without the precipice of a cliff, it's very difficult to change behavior. It's very easy to sit back and go, well, everything's going well, we've got good milk price, animal cows are good, climate is all right at the moment, and so it's easy to step back. That's a false economy. We need to be really, really careful of that mindset, because something can and will happen. Murphy's Law, it's inevitable. There's always something around the corner. And that's the reality. It's a fact. Okay, it shouldn't be an excuse, it's a fact. So what we need to think about is, what can we do today anticipating future stress? The next challenge is, if you're already burnt out from stress, that's just a leap too far. You just don't want to confront it again. And that looks a little bit like the conversation of, oh, just give me a bit of headspace, just give me a bit of room. I just need to decompress. Okay? What I would say to everybody in this room is, put a deadline on it. Put a deadline on everything. And by that I mean, I am in a lot of trouble and chaos and torment right now. I'll give myself till Friday to feel rubbish, but on Friday at 12 o'clock, I'm going to make a change. Okay? And that allows you to suffer, but not to wallow. Okay? And that's really, really important, because it's the wallowing that becomes destructive. We all suffer. Just as you're sitting there, here or online, looking at stress and stress management, what I want you to think about as well is who you're comparing yourself to. Because that is really, really dangerous. Okay? We look around and we say, well, that person's successful and they're this, that, and the other. You know nothing about the person behind the face. You don't know what got them to that point of success. There's a lot of accusation. Oh, well, they're very successful. They did this, and this. And of course, we only hear about what was gone well. We don't hear about the hardship behind it. We often don't want to hear about the hardship behind success, because then that makes us feel like failures more so. Because if they had hardship and we had hardship, but they became a success, well, that kind of rubs it in my face a little bit. So we quite often are reluctant to listen to the hardship. We're quite often good at being a victim and blaming the other person for being successful. So this is what I want everybody in the room to just think to yourself, okay? And I'm going to ask a number of questions. And at the end of it, if anybody was able to say no to one of them, I'm going to dip you in gold paint and have you as a statue, because you are a rare individual, okay? So firstly, ask yourself, have you ever felt hungry? Okay, thanks for nodding. Okay, that's the correct answer, yeah. Have you ever felt thirsty? Have you ever felt you haven't had enough time? Have you ever felt, God, nobody really gets you? Have you ever felt, why does this always happen to me and not to anybody else? Okay. Have you ever wondered, what is the point of doing any of it? Every person in this room, every person online will have experienced that. So when you look around and start comparing yourself to people in the room and think, oh, I wish I was them. Look at all the things they have. And we start making that comparison. That is a false comparison, because everybody has suffered to some extent. Okay? So what you should be doing is not comparing yourself to anybody else. You should be comparing yourself to yourself yesterday. So to your yesterday's self. That's who you're comparing yourself to. What have I done better today? What journey am I on? Because that is far more realistic. You also know more about yourself than anybody else knows about you. You also know nothing about the people in the room. Okay? So we need to be very mindful of that. Don't judge somebody on what you see and what you have. Compare yourself to yourself yesterday. Okay? Any questions before I move on those profound statements? Suffering is different to wallowing. Yes, please, Phil.
It's probably for Natalie more than yourself. I noticed that you started recording the presentation. Is it going to be available online, or otherwise people will look at it later on?
Yes.
Okay. So the question from the room is, will this recording be available online? And yes, it will. And there are many recordings on YouTube from the things that I discussed. So what I would like at the end of it, it's a great question, Phil, what I would like at the end of it is people to have some skills that they can return to and remind themselves of under pressure, okay? Because it is easy to go down that rabbit hole. I mentioned it earlier, we get very narrow focused, we stop looking around us, and it's quite nice to have a resource that you can reflect on and go to. The biggest resource, of course, is in this room or in the agricultural community, which is the people around you who have shared your suffering and who can help you on that journey. Okay, so that is the biggest resource. We had last night the privilege of describing what is exceptional about the dairy industry, and one of the comments was community. Shedding the light on things, thanks very much. Okay, so I'll keep going, all right? So sense of community in that support system. So I will speak about that a lot. So looking at, oh, my slide system doesn't want to move. Have I used my flicker the wrong way? I'm pointing at the wrong thing. I always do that, and I should be at the computer. I'll just go with this. Okay, not moving. Stress, technology. Okay, so it just seems to be a little bit frozen there, so if I move down, that's not moving. Chat amongst yourselves. I'll keep going. I'll talk about something, right? So we're going to look at a model of stress. Very simply, when we're looking at stress, just reflect on yourselves. Understanding stress is about self-awareness. So do you understand, thank you very much, that's perfect. So do you understand what makes you stressed, okay? So very simple model of stress. You've got stressors. You've got you as the individual or the business. I should clarify that the topic for today was split between business and personal resilience. I've actually combined them, okay? Because anything I do at an individual level, I can scale up to a business level. And anything that works at business level, you can scale down and apply it to individual level. Okay, so Emerson said, American philosopher said, an organization is but the lengthened shadow of a single man. And that means the organization reflects the personality. So that's a challenge in agriculture. Because if you're looking at your business and everybody runs around like headless chickens, they're probably reflecting the person at the top. Okay? So if you see behavior in your, I was going to say, a friend of mine used to always say, monkey see, monkey do. That seems quite derogatory, but it's thinking about what is seen in the workplace, they're going to reflect the personality of the business owner. Okay, so that's what I meant about the lengthened shadow of a single man or a single person, man being generic there. So stressors, looking at stressors, we have stressors at an individual level. Aspects of you and your business are the filter that those stresses go through. And your robustness or your resilience as that filter will dictate the level of consequence. Okay? Stressors exist, fact. Shouldn't be an excuse, it's a fact. So what we need to think about is what are they filtering through and what's the consequence? And that's why we look at businesses in terms of cost of production, all of the different things that you're looking at in your business to make it sustainable. That's a model of stress. Okay, so that's a stress model. That's what are the stresses in the environment and can my business cope with it? Equally, what are the stresses in my life and can I cope with them? We also know that managing stress is a learnable skill set. There are people who are better at it than others because they've had that learned skill. Maybe they've had, a lot of it is to do with upbringing, so we reflect what we see our parents doing. Maybe our parents have been passive. Maybe we've had some trauma or tragedy in our lives at a young age, and that's allowed us to, in that suffering, create a level of skill set that has helped us to manage in other times. The challenge of people who've suffered a lot and have overcome it is they're often intolerant of others. And that is a challenge. We become dismissive of somebody else. Well, what would you know? That's not stress. I'll tell you what stress is, and they go through it. And so they've written off the other person and they lose engagement. So emotional intelligence would be understanding that we all suffer from stress, and just because I don't understand what you're stressed about, I am empathetic towards the stress it causes. Is everybody with that? Agriculture can be very, very intolerant when it comes to stress. Farmers working big, long hours, like, what are you stressed about? I've got this, this, and this. That is not an attractive quality to have if you expect other people to come into your business. What I would say is agriculture offers the opportunity to look after people and to create a great experience for people who may have been confronted with severe stress elsewhere. By that I mean we see a lot in manual labour industries such as agriculture and construction. We will see a lot of people who were marginalised by mainstream education, for example, through learning difficulties or behavioural difficulties. And so we now create an opportunity in agriculture to turn caterpillars into butterflies, because we can acknowledge that, work with that person, and give them the opportunity to realize their potential, which is often far, far greater than people see from the outside. Okay. So our stressors at an individual level. So you'll be asking yourself what stresses you. There will be really silly things that you might be embarrassed to admit. I would admit some of mine, but as this is being recorded, maybe I shouldn't. So little things that will drive you crazy and nobody else will see the rationale. So I'm going to go straight out there and say, I can't stand, I'm getting stressed thinking about it, cannot stand eating soup with a dessert spoon. It just stresses me. To the point where my husband is searching for soup spoons when he's at a restaurant, okay? Stupid, irrelevant, irrational, but it's something that frustrates me. Okay, so we all have those little quirks, those little things. Those little things are very important to manage, because it's the little things that are the straws that break the camel's back. And it sounds something like this: everything has gone wrong in my life and I just snap because I couldn't find the soup spoon. Okay, so don't underestimate or undervalue your little stresses. Manage them, but don't underestimate them. Okay? The room is lucky. I'm not going to ask anybody on the spot here, so that worked out quite well. Individual level, I would look at an individual level. There'll be larger, much larger stresses, especially in terms of what you're facing in the Australian dairy industry. Anybody want to throw out one that's not as personal as soup spoons, but a frustration for them in their business or something they know winds them up? Anybody want to give an example? I need a lead cow. Somebody needs to speak. Yes, please.
When the tanker turns up at a different time and I don't know about it.
Okay, so from the room, when the tanker turns up at a different time and I don't know about it. So I have my day structured, I have my head in gear, and it doesn't go to plan. Okay, absolutely. So, okay, so a couple of nods and agree with that one in the room. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Go on, there must be loads. Yeah?
I shared last night that one of the things I love about dairy is cows.
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 Okay, great comment. So the loving cows, but also being really stressed by cows. Okay, so we're often most frustrated by the thing we like most: family, cows, etc. Okay, so yeah, absolutely right, and just that frustration. And part of the frustration comes from the fact that there's such genuine love that you're just like, can you just cooperate? I'm trying to do the best for you here. Can you just cooperate with me? Why are you being difficult? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So at an individual level, we are going to have different things that stress us. We also have them at a group level. So the group level in this scenario could be dairy farmers in the region you're in. That could be the group level. So stressors that are hitting you, but not necessarily hitting somebody else. Okay, and a state like New South Wales is huge. And you're thinking about the different stresses in the different areas, that one area is going, not a problem for us, what's your problem? Why are we discussing this? Why are we even thinking about this? Why are we putting money into this? It's not an issue. But if it's an issue for another area, then yes, it's an issue. And then we have the stress of trying to decide whose stress is more important. Okay, and that's a huge, huge challenge, because then we have a bit of a food fight and we get in-house fighting rather than having a rational conversation. And that is always the challenge for a body like Dairy New South Wales or for Dairy Australia, who have a limited resource in terms of money, time and personnel, and who gets precedence. That is a huge, huge challenge, because my stress is the biggest thing in the world if I own it. And nobody else's could possibly be as big. So that is a huge challenge for an organising body to overcome that scenario. Okay. Organisational, so it could be the organisational, like within the dairy industry itself, so the larger dairy industry could be the organisation. And then, of course, there are many, many extra organisational stressors. Typically in agriculture, we're going to talk about what as an extra organisational stressor, so stress outside of the business. Climate, great answer. Milk price, whoever said it, okay, out of your control if you're looking at a world milk price. What else have we got? What other things are happening? Extra organisational? Consumer behaviour, great answer. So public or consumer behaviour, consumer opinion, yeah, great. Somebody else said something? Policy, okay, government policy, sorry, yeah. So government policy, consumer behaviour, climate, milk price. To ask you the next question. Can we control any of those things?
We can influence them
Sometimes, okay, and it's a great answer. So the answer from the room is we can influence them sometimes, but we cannot control them. Okay, they are fact. We can't use them as an excuse. Okay, so what we can do is we can influence them to an extent, but the most important thing we can do is control our own response to them. Okay, that's really, really important. So if you look at somewhere in Europe, the Norwegians will say there's no such thing as bad weather, it's bad clothing. Okay, that's a different way of looking at it. Now, I know that's maybe a trite statement here where you get far more extreme climate scenarios than we do, but it's something to think about. Okay, what can you control? One of the things you can control is your own personal response to it. You can allow it to fry your head, or you can say, I can't control world milk price, therefore, I will have a very, very keen understanding of the cost of production in my business, which will allow me to cope at a certain level, preferably with a bit of sponge in between, bit of margin, okay? That's what we're looking at. So you're looking at, if you cannot control it, I tell you here and now, it is psychologically destructive, it is energy consuming to worry and fret about something you cannot control, because there is no answer to that. There's no outcome in it, just your own self-destruction. And I genuinely mean that. It gets to that point. As powerful as the human brain is in terms of a machine, it is extremely fragile if mishandled. So a dripping tap can wear a stone. And if you're allowing yourself to chip away at your own personal confidence, then you're in trouble. So we need to be able to step aside and say, can I control this? No. What can I control? Can I control world milk price? No. What can I control? Can I control climate? No. What can I control? I can control my readiness for it. I can make sure that when I'm not being hit by big events, I'm not taking it easy either. As much as I am seduced by the idea of stepping back and just relaxing for an amount of time, I'm not going to fall into that trap. But I started off at the beginning and I said, have a bit of self-compassion, put a deadline on suffering so that you don't fall into wallowing. Okay. Right. So what about the individual or the business? So any characteristics of an individual we can apply to the business and vice versa. I don't know, Nat, if there's a special magic. Oh, it worked. Lovely. Right. Okay. Stress averted. Fantastic. Looking at the individual, so things in the individual look like personalities, so the personality of the individual. I had the pleasure last week of working with a number of groups and we did some personality testing. Okay, personality testing is an indicator, it is not absolute. It is certainly not something that you should be using to use a stick to beat people with. That's who I am, get over it. Okay, that's not what it's about. That's what a lot of people do. That's a very weak position. What personality testing looks like is preferences under pressure. And understanding that if you're a big picture person or a detailed person, that's the information you should seek. Equally, being able to communicate to somebody else going, you know, it really frustrates me when you don't tell me, when you change the agenda. It really frustrates me that you didn't let me know in time that the tanker was coming in. Because that's something that I need to control. The next person will be like, yeah, it's fine. Don't care when the tanker comes in. Because they don't have, their head isn't geared in that way. Okay, so we've got aspects of personality. Personality, I mentioned already, is going to be reflected into the business. So if you've got a very organized, structured business that needs a place for everything and everything in its place, that's what employees are going to conform to. So it's reflecting the personality that's there. The personality, so mental toughness. Mental toughness is the learned ability to cope with stress. It's the learned ability to cope with stress. So I was privileged in my days as a student. My supervisor is one of the lead thinkers in mental toughness. And mental toughness is proactively developing skill sets such as time management, goal setting, visualization, imagery, breath control, meditation, all of those things. Learn skill sets that allow people to cope under pressure. In mental toughness, there are two very interesting facts. Culturally, Australia comes out as more mentally tough than most cultures. Okay, now there's probably historically a reason for that. The toughest survived, it's a harsh country. And so when people came out initially, it was the tougher individuals who learned to be tough to cope with that scenario. That is probably where the skew is in terms of that. That's mental toughness. The other one is there's no gender difference, except on one subscale. And that is females, women, tend to have less confidence in their own abilities. There's a lot of research to suggest that that is hardwiring from our days as cavemen and women. Okay, so is there a question? No?
Probably.
Yes.
I always thought risk-taking was a gender difference. That's why so many young men kill themselves in cars, because they're higher risk takers. And then that can drive a level of stress because of the risk you take.
Okay. So, comment in the room that gender difference on risk-taking. Well, risk-taking is your confidence and abilities. I'm a great driver, of course I can drive this at this speed. So the comment was young men are going to race, are going to speed more, and therefore are higher probability of getting killed because more people are doing it and more young men are doing it. That's about confidence and abilities. The belief that I can drive this dangerously and be safe and cope. Versus the next person who goes, I'm not confident enough in my skill set to believe I can push it to that level. So it's actually the same thing, if that makes sense. Yeah, so risk-taking comes down to confidence and abilities. If you've got somebody in your business who is averse to risk, it is down to their lack of confidence in what you're trying to achieve. Usually a misunderstanding of finance. They don't understand the debt levels, they don't understand the repayment terms. And so they're reluctant to engage in the next level of risk because there's too much fear attached with that, and they doubt their ability within that concept. Okay, great shout. So risk-taking will be attached to confidence and abilities. For people in the room who lack confidence and abilities, which will happen to all of you, as we mentioned earlier when I went through, if anybody can say no to one of these questions, I'd be impressed. There will be points across your career excuse me, where you will have lacked confidence in your abilities. Under pressure, we did a little exercise last night. We talked about what's fantastic about the dairy industry, worth remembering when you're stressed, easy to lose sight of. So something we would use a lot with elite athletes. I'm a chartered sports and exercise psychologist as well. One of the things we would use with elite athletes is like an affirmation statement. I do this a lot with women in the workplace who are reluctant to promote themselves internally because they lack confidence in their abilities. And so one of the ways we can remind somebody that they have value and great abilities is just a little piece of paper that lists all your achievements. Okay? This is not about going out and blowing your own trumpet and telling people how amazing you are. This is the quiet confidence of knowing you are capable. This is the quiet confidence on the day that you're just beginning to self-sabotage a little bit, that you can take out a piece of paper and remind yourself of everything you have achieved. And that allows you to feel worth it. Okay? So that helps your self-worth. Hold on a minute, of course I'm capable of doing this. I deserve to be here and I'm more than capable of being here. Look at all the things I've done. Very, very simple statement, very, very useful. I work with a large construction company in the UK. A lot of vulnerable individuals are attracted to this business because the senior management absolutely adore people and want the opportunity to bring young people through their business and to create opportunity for them. So we quite often speak to the individuals who are, and I mean suffering, a lot of mental I suppose psychological issues where they're vulnerable to the extent that we might be worried about their own personal safety. And one of the things we do with them is we write one of these statements, and I say, who are the people you most admire in this business? And they'll name 2 or 3 people. We get those 2 or 3 people to sign it, and then we give that statement to the person. So in their moment of doubt, when they're on their own, so it's all well and good to do this when we're all together, but what about when somebody goes away and is in their own head? So they have that statement that just helps them to remind themselves what they're doing. Okay. I don't know, do we need to open the door or a bit of airflow? I'm feeling a little bit warm. Right. Okay. Thanks, Paul. So perspective. Perspective is the ability to know that stress is transient, so stress changes, and perspective is the idea that this too shall pass. Okay. We've survived this before, we'll survive it again. Now the problem with perspective is to create perspective, you need to have distance as well, to be able to look back and say, I survived. If you're constantly being hit by stresses, you're not getting a chance to decompress. So we have this amount of absorbency to take stress. If we don't decompress, so we get hit by stress, that squashes. If we don't allow that to come back again, we're starting with a lower level of absorbency. And so we're doing this, and we're doing this, and then we find ourselves really in trouble. So we need the opportunity to decompress, which maybe sounds like I'm contradicting myself because I said put a deadline on your suffering. So you do need to suffer, but you need to control how long you let that happen because you need to put actions in place to allow that decompression. Does everybody understand that? So that creates perspective. Distance between the event and the thinking about it creates perspective. And that could be physical distance. Question?
So if the cause of the stress is ongoing, how do you put a deadline because it's always present?
Great question. So if the cause of the stress is ongoing, how do you put a deadline in so to manage it, I suppose? So one of the things would be giving yourself permission to get away from the stress for an amount of time. That could be going for a coffee in town one morning, guilt-free, just giving yourself permission to do that, just stepping. So if we were talking about agriculture, of course, we are confronted every day with, for the vast majority of people in agriculture, you can't get away from that stress because it's on your doorstep. Now, I would see in Ireland, and definitely see next-gen farmers purposefully building off farm, making that conscious decision not to live on the farm because they want that level of separation. Okay. Not everybody has that opportunity. So how can you create that opportunity for yourself? Well, simple things. A really simple thing is what does your farm office look like? Okay, so the farm office, if it's in your house, where do those papers end up? Do they end up at the kitchen table? Do they end up on the living room table? Is the stress of your business just leaching into other areas of your life? Having the discipline to close that door and say, well, I'm having my cup of tea, I'm having my cup of tea. One of the first things I do with my dairy clients is I ask them if at all possible, quite often is, because a lot of farms, particularly in Ireland, more older farms are going to have old outside buildings, to spend some money in turning that into an office. Like if we think about it, money in a dairy business is made in the dairy and in the office. Think of the millions that are pumped into a dairy and think of the shoddy rubbish that people are willing to put up with in the office. Okay, but the office is where you make your money. You actually arguably make more money in the office than you do in the dairy because you are, through compliance and paperwork, good decision making and controlling costs of production, you actually make more money in the office. So not investing in your office is really foolish. So what I often ask clients to do to great effect is either to remove their office from their house or seal the house door from the inside. So seal the door from the inside, open the window on the outside and turn that into an outside door. So that there is literally distance to be traveled. Even if it's only 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, it's still the idea, now I can change my hat, not filtering through. This is a huge, huge challenge in terms, it's not a huge challenge, this is a huge benefit if you want your children to go into dairy. Allowing the home to be a safe haven is really, really important, and this comes back to stress. A safe place that isn't confronted by the stress, and that could be as simple as protecting the kitchen, protecting the family room, and not allowing dairy to leach in there. The other thing would be saying to yourself, I'm not going to speak about dairy after 5 o'clock at night or after 6 o'clock at night, or I'm not going to have, and having the discipline to do that. Getting other people to hold you accountable to doing it. You spent all day farming, have a break. Okay? Great comment, great question. Anybody else want to follow up on that? Anybody done that? Anybody taken the opportunity to separate? Yeah, question or comment?
Comment. I was going to say, when you're talking about the soup spoon and personal stresses, etc., a cluttered house or a messy house, it just is so overwhelming for me. I cannot function if there's chaos and clutter around.
Yeah. So the comment from the room is that clutter is a huge source of stress. Okay, now we can use clutter really well to avoid doing things we don't want to do. Okay, so paperwork, office work, well, if I go in there, I'm not going to find the piece of paper anyway, so I'll do it another time. Okay, so we do use that, but yeah, clutter and disorganization, which is a little bit, it relates actually directly to the comment about the tanker not coming on time. That's part of that organization piece. I had my mind set up ready to do something and it didn't happen. That's stressful. Okay. What we need to be able to do is say, that's a current frustration. I'm annoyed today, but I'm not going to let it wind me up. However, that may well be the straw that breaks the camel's back on a day when everything has gone wrong. Okay. Remember that behavior exists because it's allowed to. Okay, so if you've got, for example, let's take the tanker, the driver, they're not coming in on time, asking them and holding them accountable. It doesn't have to be rude or aggressive. Please don't be rude or aggressive. Your tanker, the driver of the tanker is a brand ambassador for your business, and you don't want them telling other farms down the road that you are one aggressive, angry person that isn't worth working for. But what you should say is, look, why didn't you come on time yesterday? It was a frustration for me. And having that, because people will push boundaries if they can. Nobody commented on me being late, so there's no real imperative for me to be on time tomorrow. Or of all the 10, if I go into 10 farms and 9 of them will hold me accountable to be on time and the 10th person doesn't, well then I'll play with the 10th person. And I'll allow that to move on. And actually it's I can't say it, I'm Irish, it's the T's that kill me. The 10th person is the one that actually needs you to be there on time. Okay. So one of the challenges with stress and pressure is if we don't articulate it, people won't help. This is a social proof concept. It's very, very interesting when we look at influence and persuasion from a psychology perspective. People won't help if people don't help. But if somebody stops to help you, lots of people will stop to help you. So if you think about an accident on the side of the road, if nobody stops, nobody will stop, because they're assuming there's nothing wrong because nobody else has made an effort. But if one person stops, all of a sudden lots of people stop. Can we help? What can we do? Okay? That is social proof. That is animal behavior. That's a really, really important thing. Nobody will help you if you don't signal you need help. Okay. So clutter, yeah, absolutely getting structured. Loads of research around that. When we look at lean management would be looking at removing waste from the system. And part of waste is looking for things. Very frustrating. Kills morale, hemorrhages energy, all of those things, okay? So looking for things, part of lean management, but if we've got a place for everything and everything in its place, then we're not looking for stuff. So yeah, absolutely. The next person will be freaked out if you came in and had their place perfect. They'd be like, I can't find anything, it's too tidy and organized. Don't touch my things, okay? Right, so let's see what we have next. Age, now that could be your personal age. So what stressed you as a child doesn't stress you now. What's stressing you now didn't register as a child. Could be age and maturity of the business. So if you're an established business, you've got different stresses to an emerging business, to a growing business, to a consolidating business. So age of the business, age of of the behavior that you're trying to embed, that's going to impact the level of stress that you have as well. Okay, right. Gender differences, of course. Next one is social support. So interestingly, I'll just do the last one first and come back to social support. So physical fitness. Physical fitness, we know, I mean, there's so much research to demonstrate that physical fitness, because actually stress manifests itself physically. One of them being hyperventilating. And so the ability to de-escalate your breathing helps you to calm down, okay? Because hyperventilating is a signal to your brain going, you're in trouble, you can't breathe properly, and that's very stressful. That's a huge signal. And so we know from physical fitness, from mental fitness, such as meditation, I might be reading a book, getting away, the opportunity to get away, back to Ken's question about if you're always confronted at how do you get away from it. I recommend all of you, because the vast majority of people here are going to be owner-operators, are listening to the call, are owner-operators. Anything that you do that develops you as a person or protects you and makes you more resilient should be done at the cost of the business, not of your personal time. Because the return is massive. Should be done at the cost of the business, not at your personal time. So I have a lot of clients who maybe they enjoy running or cycling or reading or something like that, self-development. Do it at the cost of the business. Because it's not a cost to the business at all. It's a huge investment for the business. If you're the owner-operator, the business owner, your value to the business is huge. Taking a bit of time every day to look after yourself, that has a massive return.
Explain that again. What do you mean cost of the business? Do you mean like doing it in work?
Doing it on work hours. So the question from the room is, what do I mean by cost of business? It should be on work hours time, not at your personal time, because there's actually a big return for your business. Of course, if you worked for somebody else, you can't do it on the other person's time. You have to do it outside of time. But you've all the risk of the business, extract some of the privileges, which is the opportunity to look after yourself on the business's time. And that actually returns hugely, really, really impressively how that returns. And it's a small thing. It could be literally, I mentioned it earlier, the cup of coffee in town. It could be going for that nice walk. It could be going for, some lengths of the swimming pool. It could be just taking time out to read the book you've always wanted to read. Now, for the most part, if I say that to a room of farmers, they get very, very uncomfortable, very agitated at the idea that they might be perceived to be enjoying themselves during work hours. Okay, dangerous thinking. Phil?
Observing my own sort of business and behaviour, I make very little personal time for myself. And I guess where I would see that being relevant is making personal time is good for my business.
Yeah. So you're saying it is relevant? Yeah, okay, so the comment from the room is not taking personal time and enough personal time from the business, and actually making personal time will be totally relevant to the business. If it's a behaviour you're not used to, I'm not asking you to drop everything and go off on a 3-month world cruise. That will totally freak people out. Any behaviour you want to instill, do bite-sized chunks. Take 20 minutes and guess what'll happen? You won't lose millions, nobody will die, the world won't end, and the farm will be still outside the door when you get there. Okay, 20 minutes, we can all do 20 minutes. So we're dipping our toe. If you want to change behaviour, dip your toe. If you're nervous and anxious about what other people think of you, get over it. I mean that sincerely, get over it. If there are people in your system or around you who are judging you for looking after yourself, you should not at any point value their opinion. The people who are invested in you, who want you to do well, they will applaud every bit of it and ask you, how can I do that too? How can I support you to do that? Okay? Stop thinking about what other people might see. We've no idea. They might be looking in your direction, but they're thinking about when they go on their 3-month world cruise. Okay? So take that opportunity. And we could time that in. So if we comment from the room about taking that time at the cost of business, putting it in somewhere. And you might say to yourself, God, I always have a lull after lunch. I'm not productive. We know actually from circadian rhythms and despite circadian rhythms, so whether you're a morning lark or a night owl, vast majority of people here, I presume, are morning people. Especially that person who woke up at 4:20 this morning in the room above me, and I was like, damn, dairy farmers, what's that about? Anyway, had a shower, I was like, what? Okay, so regardless of your circadian rhythms, people have a natural dip after lunch, and they'll have a natural dip at the other side in the middle of the night as well. Okay, so if that's not a productive time for you in your business, maybe that's when you go and do your little bit for yourself. Okay, so finding a place where you can do it, preferably guilt-free. That's going to incentivize you. Coming back and be rational and saying, nothing happened, the business is still there, and you know what, I feel really good about myself because I got that space. And that will be back to the great question from Ken about if the stress is always in front of you, how do you get away from that? It's not about walking away from the business necessarily, it's about just finding spaces in that day. Another brilliant way to do it is huge amount of research around gratitude. Huge amount of research. So up till maybe 10, 15 years ago, psychology was very about, looking at retrospective, so looking at childhood trauma, looking at life trauma, looking backwards. See huge shifts now in positive psychology and things like gratitude and being solutions focused. So not denying that things have happened to the individual, working with them, but then moving forward. And part of that research is around the idea of gratitude. And so when our heads are in and we're stuck in the mess, it can be very, very difficult to see that there was value in anything that happened that day. But when we start to practice what's called gratitude, or a gratitude journal, we can start looking for those little things that just made it bearable. And that might be the really nice cup of tea. It might be the friendly hello from the postman. It might be, you know, your dog coming up for a cuddle, whatever it is. It could be really small things in the beginning. But what we've seen in the gratitude research, really, really interesting, in what's fascinating about, as much as we still don't know a huge amount about the human brain, but we know a lot more, and a lot of it has come from what's called functional MRI scanning. So we give a person a task and their brain is scanned using like a hairnet, if you like, okay? And different parts of the brain light up depending on the task they're being asked. And what they did was they got a group of people and they scanned their brain before doing an exercise on gratitude. The exercise was that you had to, every day, at the end of the day, you had to write 3 things you were grateful for. And you couldn't go, same as yesterday, see Monday. You had to see something new every single day. Within 21 days, 3 weeks, 21 days, there was a change in the neural pathways of the brain. Because what you have done there is you have primed, if you're looking for positive stuff, if you have to record positive things, you have to start looking for positive things. So you're priming the brain to have rose-colored glasses. On the day that you think everything is wrong, what do you see? Disaster. You see everything is wrong. Oh, typical. There's no milk left for my cup of tea. Oh, I spilled my coffee. Oh, I did this. And you're just gone into this, everything is disaster. And you're escalating it into crazy stuff. Whereas if you're stopping yourself and going, well, if I've got to fill out my journal with 3 positive things, I better be on the lookout for 3 positive things, it changes the neural pathway, it changes the mindset. Now, this is something called the confirmation bias. Okay, so you seek confirming evidence. So you're looking for positive things. And when you look at it, when you do that, you acknowledge this is not about being, oh, everything's amazing while the world is falling around. It's not saying that for a second. What it's saying that is even in disaster, you can have positives. You can have simple things that will keep you going. If you look at research on love, it's never the big gestures that's love. It's the small gestures. Cups of tea, leaving the light on for the person when the person's coming home. Simple things are what make a difference to humans, not the big, huge gestures. Okay, so really, really powerful. Can't remember why I got onto all of that, but anyway, how are we doing for time? Right, okay. So looking at social support. So when we look at mental toughness and resilience across a large cohort, there's many things that make individuals resilient or mentally tough. But across a large cohort, the 2 factors that are common are perspective. So the ability to understand that this too shall pass, that stress is transient, and social support. Now we know that from the housewives adage, a problem shared is a problem halved. We know that. We know that intuitively for years and years and years. And that's one of the shining lights, I think, in agriculture, is that sense of community. Okay, the ability to sit in the room and to share problems and to discuss things, really, really powerful. So that social support network, draw on it. I often do, if I was doing some longer workshops, I often do an exercise. I do the fantasy dairy team. And we start off and we think about who are all the players in your team. And in a business, in a dairy business in Ireland, for example, there are a minimum of 30 stakeholders who can contribute to or benefit from your business. So your team is much, much bigger than you might realize. Of course, when you're under pressure and stressed, you forget all of the other people who are attached to your business but not directly in front of you. Okay? Service providers, neighbors, discussion group, advisors, extension, all of the people who are available to you have the potential to help you at that time. So it's well worth, in peace times, stopping to work out who is there, who's available, who has your better interests in heart, who's not judging you but wants to help, so that on the day you're in trouble, you can call them. I had the privilege of being in a very high-performing group last week, and that group, as a support network, they call each other, they look after each other. Really quite impressive. So it's establishing those networks. We heard yesterday about the mentoring program. What a great idea, having somebody you can speak to who may have been through it before. Don't forget that could be your parents. Could be your children, it could be your siblings. They're there as well. It always amazes people to find out that family are people too. Okay, 10.
15, 20 years ago, we used to have a lot of discussion groups, and they were quite embedded in the culture of dairy farming. But they've sort of faded, and it's really hard to get momentum in that space again. But it's obviously really important. Having that network or that social contact, people just seem to be getting caught up in their own businesses and not getting out. I'm not sure. Is it discussion groups? Is there something else now that's got to replace that? But how do you create these social support groups? Because we try and then we can't sustain them because we can't keep there's not enough commitment to them. I don't know what the solution is.
Okay, so the question from the room is, with the decline of discussion groups and the loss of that support network, what is the answer, and how do you, I suppose first I could look at how discussion groups stay or survive. Is it has to be internal, it has to be the members within it, so a form of informal leadership where you've got somebody driving it and pushing it through, and that will have to come from the farmers. The challenge is farmers are already under pressure. The challenge is the person who's very proactive at doing things, perceived by others as being capable, will be left to do those things. That person then becomes fed up and feels, well, I'm the only one who does anything, so why would I bother anymore? I'm not getting anything back. And that's the challenge. In fact, that's often a misconstruction, because the person who is driving it and pushing it may well be the person who needs it most, and therefore the one who needs most support. But because they look like they're efficient and constructive in what they're doing, people perceive from the outside that that person is capable. Okay, so it's about understanding what's the best way to do it. And of course, in this room yesterday, we discussed about how do you manage these things. Is it online? Is it in person? Do you stay over for a night? How do you manage those things? It is a challenge, like really interestingly, the discussion group one, and I would have seen it a lot in Ireland, is the discussion groups are as helpful as they are destructive, because we ended up seeing a lot of peer pressure in Ireland where people expanded based on the group we're doing it, so I feel obliged to, though I don't actually know why I'm doing it or how to do it. So regulating a peer group is quite difficult. It is challenging. For the most part, anecdotally, I would say there's more positives than benefits, but it's just understanding, look, under stress and pressure, we will go for the path of least resistance. And if I have to ring people and encourage people and drag people and bribe people, and then they have to get in their car and make the effort to get off farm, you're really confronting a lot of barriers. So it's probably learning how to chip away individual barriers rather than expecting to get the group back in straight away. You're also very, very challenged geographically. You know, it's not like you've got a lot of farmers in one region. It's a huge challenge. So I don't know the answer, Ken, but I will have a think about it and see what I can think. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on that, or any pros or cons on the discussion group, or anybody have an insight as to why they feel? I suspect reduction in the industry makes a massive difference to any discussion group, because you're losing members straight away. When you lose people from the industry, you've automatically hit the discussion group scenario. Yeah.
We actually had a fair bit of discussion last night around the discussion groups with Justin in our workshop group, and we were talking about a model of bi-monthly face-to-face catch-up, but having a WhatsApp group with those individual regional areas, given the changes that have taken place from COVID, etc., not being able to get people together, or people needing that connection within their local community. How can we try and mold the two together?
Yeah.
So maybe we can have a chat about that.
Yeah, excellent comment from the room. So saying about maybe having a bi-monthly meeting, so that's every 2 months, so it's not overwhelming. It's only 6 days a year. And then maybe having a WhatsApp group that allows that exchange of information. So I suppose it's saying the structure is no longer as obvious as it was, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't look for alternatives and try and do something. So great discussion to have been had in the room yesterday. So that's the social support network, and of course that sense of community. And there's many aspects of pride around that. So that came up yesterday, the backbone of the community. We talk about the fabric of the country. We talk about it in Ireland for, you know, they're part of the countryside in terms of community and dairy and etc. So that social support network is important. What I would say to all of you is in your social support network, you know, there's some research to suggest that we are the combined personality of the 6 people we spend most time with. It is in your interest to spend time with people who are supportive of you and not trying to tear you down. Okay? So it's surround yourself with positive people. And just ask yourself, I have my acid test is a friend. For me, an acid test, a friend is they should make you smile. When you think about meeting them or seeing them, you shouldn't go, oh God, I've got to go and have coffee. Because if that's your automatic reaction, that ain't no friend. Because a friend should be a source of energy to keep you going, not somebody who you just think, I can't do that, okay? The other thing I would also say is the person who's egging you on or telling you what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, ask yourself, when you commit to those things, will they be there in the middle of the night to hold your hand when you're stressed that you can't complete them? And if that's somebody you can't call on, why are you taking their opinion? Okay? So this resilience, it's not just about social support, it's about the correct social support. It's about looking for the right people who make it happen. And they're not necessarily the big shiny people who are highly successful in everything else, but they're people who have your better interest. They have the power to influence you and they're interested to do so in a positive way. Okay, still only in the first slide, by the way. So, right, reversing. And the last part of that is the level of outcome. So it's going to dictate all of those factors. So we've got a number of stressors coming from different levels, and the level of outcome or the size of the outcome or the severity of the outcome is going to be dictated by that middle part. So how the business looks, how the person is in terms of resilience. I mentioned it earlier that as powerful as the human brain is as a machine, it is also highly fragile. So we need to be investing in that. Just because you've had a good year, you know, as much as you're embedding those behaviors, there is the potential that you will not be able to cope the next time. So we need to be mindful of that. And an example that always strikes me is in a group in England, big grazing area, highly capable farmers, and a person in the room was at the back of the room kind of a bit uncomfortable and chatting and all this. And I was thinking, I'm going to go down there and tell that person to stop in less polite manners, less polite words. And the following day, we'd been discussing all of this, and the following day he just came in and said, wow, we were talking about change management and the roller coaster of emotion. And he just said, you described, so this person I was looking at getting annoyed, and I was getting annoyed going, come on, focus, you're distracting people. He came in the next day and said that I basically described his previous year in farming. And what had happened to this individual is that he had what he would consider 15 years of perfect farming. Like he used to look around him going, what is everybody's problem? I don't see it. I don't understand what the stress is. Why are people complaining all the time? And he went in 15 years, so 15 years of perfect farming, and in the space of a year, went to that confidence to suicidal thoughts. Because chip away, got hit with calf health, got hit, everything just escalated. And not only did all of those things happen after each other, because he'd never confronted that before, he had no response mechanism. Okay, so when everything is lovely and life has been easy, when you hit a wall, that becomes a serious blockage. So we need to be mindful of developing ourselves, investing in ourselves, so that even when we're feeling fantastic, we're not dismissive. We're actually saying, and this too shall pass, so I need to make sure that I'm ready for the next stressor. Okay? So we're always investing, always looking after ourselves. A frustration for me working in people management and as a psychologist is to see the extraordinary effort, time, money, the whole lot invested. I thought it was funny yesterday when I did the cyst day. To me, it's blindingly obvious that dairy is a triadic relationship of people, system, and cows. And Professor Garcia came up nearly in tears going, I can't separate cows and system, what are you talking about? But when we look at cows and system, the amount of money invested is in there. But for me, in the people space, you do not have good cows and system without good people. You really don't. And I can guarantee you, you do not have good people if you are not the sharpest tool you can be in your own business. Because the business reflects the personality of the business owner. And if you're not looking after yourself, that is the signal you send to your staff every day. And they'll either conform to your behavior or they'll exit. The likelihood is nowadays they'll exit because they don't have to stay there. There's so many other options of better places to be if that's what they see. So we need that investment. I'm always amazed in the discussion groups in Ireland, like I kind of playing bingo, I'm collecting the different discussion groups, but you know, realistically, they should be spending a third of the year grass, cows, people. They might do people once every 2 to 3 years. And they'll say in the session, this is really good, we should do it more often, and hey presto, they don't do it more often, okay? Unless they're the higher performing businesses, because the higher performing businesses are the ones who invest in people first, okay? Including themselves. Right, so the outcome, we can have it at a psychological level. The psychological level would be self-esteem, lack of self-confidence, undermining yourself, maybe that negative self-talk. You'd often see as children, you'd see in old-fashioned cartoons, you'd have the little angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the other, usually left and right. Sinister, being from Sinestra, the left hand. So you see these little chats going on, and one is egging the on, the other is going, no, be good, do what you're supposed to do. So those psychological, part of that psychological consequence is that negative self-talk. Negative self-talk is productive until it's not. So it's good for people to say you need to do well, you need to be on top of it. It's good to keep competitive advantage until it becomes destructive and self-deprecating. Okay. Behavioral, going to look like things being forgetful, maybe being aggressive. Behavioral is a huge issue in terms of health and safety. Massive issue, like doing silly things, taking shortcuts, etc. Cognitively impaired, then I mentioned that already. So cognitive, your brain can only cope with so many things. In fact, your brain only really copes with one thing at a time. So for anybody in the room who wears multitasking as a badge of honor, multitasking is highly inefficient. And we know that from all sorts of research. And one of the reasons multitasking is highly inefficient is because when your brain swaps between tasks, there's a split-second blind spot. And that's where we get accidents on farm. That's where we get car crashes. That's where we get that challenge. Another one is that, and one of the best psychological experiments, and you can see this online, is to show that the brain needs to be focused on one task. Is a very famous video where candidates were asked to count. There was a team playing football or basketball or something, and they're asked to count all the people in the yellow, in an orange shirt or something like that. And at the end of it, they say, did anybody see the gorilla? And most people won't have seen the gorilla because they are so intent on counting that they didn't see the gorilla. And I was, when I brought the board up last night to speak, David Nation said, oh, are we going to play hangman? And it just reminded me that I was playing hangman with my children on the television the other day, and I didn't even realize it was hangman because I was so busy trying to work out what the word was on the things, I didn't even see the hangman picture. And I was like, what are you talking about, hangman? We didn't play hangman. They were like, you were there for an hour trying to guess the words. And I hadn't seen the hangman because I was so focused on, well, if it's it's a two-word country, what could it be? So you've cognitively impaired is a really, really dangerous one when we get into trouble. And then physiologically, of course. So if you remove a stress from a person, they'll always go, oh, you can see them physically stand taller. So the expression, you remove the weight of the world from my shoulders, of course, Atlas carrying the world. And when you remove that stress, people, they stand up, they walk better, and they walk looser, and they walk away almost with a bounce in their step. So we know it manifests itself physiologically, whether that's heart conditions, it could be bad skin, it could be being run down, being immunocompromised because of that stress. So there's a lot of very negative consequence if we are not looking after this middle part. Stephen Covey, really well-known management guru, always talks about the 7 habits of highly effective people is the piece of work he's most known for. My main area of leadership, my specialism is leadership, is actually the only piece of research where they talk about the leader investing in themselves. And he describes it as sharpen the saw. And you know if a tool is blunt, it doesn't do the job properly. You've got to look after and maintain a tool for it to work properly. If you think of yourself as the most effective tool in your own life, if you're blunt, you're of limited use to yourself, and you're certainly of limited use to the other people in your life that you're probably trying desperately to be a great tool for. Okay, so it's really simple. Sharpen the saw, look after yourself. You're going to be a far more productive leader. That is the challenge of leadership. It's the challenge of being a teacher, a parent, an employer, a manager. We're always looking out to help the troops. The best way to help the troops is to make sure that we are a good role model for the troops. And that's about investing in ourselves as much as investing in anybody else. Okay? Any questions? I appreciate that you're all just sitting looking at me, so just in terms of the logistics, it makes it slightly different. Ken, a question from the room, or a comment?
We've just done some research from installment funding. We looked at how farmers responded on the natural disaster events. And it seems from the research so far that generally farmers respond well to those short, sharp events or events that they've got a framework or that they've got experience in. But when an event went beyond their framework or beyond their previous experience, it might be because it was extended over a long period of time or much more severe, then it was outside of their ability to deal with it as easily because they didn't have a framework to deal with it. So maybe if some of these other things were, bedrock things were in place, possibly would deal with those bigger events better because
The resilience is there.
resilience.
Okay, so a comment from the room is about being able to cope with, so short, sharp events with a clear end in sight, we can all cope with. Okay, brain can work towards that. We can take a severe amount of hardship if we know there's light at the end of the tunnel, if we can see that deadline. Okay, so, but on those longer ongoing ones where there isn't a framework, so this is the comment from the room, where there isn't a framework, it's more difficult to cope, but is, the more structured and robust the individual or the business is, they can cope better, but they will too diminish in their ability to cope. So this is about the brain being, philosophy calls it teleological or target focused. Okay? Think of COVID as a perfect example. If we had been told by our governments, you will have a hard lockdown for 3 years, we'd have said, oh gee, that's annoying, but we'll do it. But because there was stop and start and stop and start, the brain had nothing to track towards. The brain needs something to track towards to have stability, okay? And it's that lack of being able to track towards something specific. In the absence of something specific to track towards, you need to create those interim barriers for yourself. And they look like things in under pressure. I'll just make it through today. I'll just make it through this week. And you're putting those in place to keep you sane. We know that a lot from prisoner of war scenarios, where there's quite a lot of, Stockdale wrote a book about in the Vietnamese camps, and it was the people who believed they would be out by Christmas. They were the ones who just disintegrated because there was no guarantee, and they had their hopes all built up, and then it was taken away, and it was taken away. It was the people who survived from day to day that actually survived. So in the absence of a hard barrier, and this would be true with time management in a far more shiny, nice way, that if I was doing a time management workshop, I would talk all the time about to be efficient and productive from farm, you're putting barriers in place to allow you not to let time drift. So putting in the absence of a definite end, you put them in for you. And that might look like under severe pressure. I'll just get through today. I'll just get through this morning. I'm just going to get through that, and then I'll deal with the next thing. Or I'll deal with the next thing. I'm just going to manage the next thing, and working like that. So it is so we are working and we are developing stability and resilience within our business so that we have a groundworks or a foundation that allows turbulence on top. But even very, very robust businesses will take a hit if there's no end in sight to the hardship. Okay, does everybody understand that? Yeah, great question. Okay. Droughts, never, all of these things. It's a good comment about the droughts because When I came out to Australia in 2019, Ireland had a really difficult 2018. So Irish agriculture had an extraordinary 2018 where it had been a very, very wet spring. And then I say, and we had 6 weeks of drought. Now, if you say that, there's a giggle in the room. There's a number of people there going, that's not a drought. I'll tell you what a drought is, okay? And that was, the problem is Ireland is a temperate climate that does not experience extremes. And so a very, very wet weather that didn't allow, and we're block system. So the block system in Ireland is you calve in February and March so you can get the grass at its best, at its most nutritious time in April. And if you can't get out there, people panic. And so not only do they not get out, but then when there was no growing phase because we went from extremely heavy rain into a drought. People 5 years later are still severely burnt by that year and haven't been able to decompress from it. They've carried that forward. Now, of course, people in this room are going to just dismiss that as like an annoying fly in their face because you're so used to other things. But if I have no resilience for that idea, and I never anticipated that, when it happens, it hurts, really, really hurts. Okay. So, and it's in reality because climate is changing everywhere. We're getting far more storm alerts, far more extreme conditions that we're not used to. The likelihood is those things will happen again, but we need to be careful not to, we need to panic slowly. In any of those scenarios, you've got to panic slowly because the problem with panicking quickly is you will not have that stop, think, act mechanism. So that's a panic slowly, stop, think, act. It's really powerful. It's used a lot in health and safety. Speaking to a New Zealand dairy farmer, and we were talking about stop, think, act. And they use that in health and safety as a concept in their business in New Zealand. So stop, think, act, and that allows you to panic slowly. Okay. Again, you need to embed that when you're not under pressure, or you just do what you've always done. Okay, great, great question. So yes, all businesses, what we see is that there's a misunderstanding of resilience and stress management that almost like good, robust, resilient businesses don't feel it. Of course they feel it. All businesses are hit by it. All businesses are hit by it. It's not like they had an easy ride through it, but they're able to come out the other side sooner, or at least not as damaged. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So to think that being a really capable individual, fully rounded, a really robust business means you're impervious to stress is really, really like nonsensical. You've got to understand that no matter how well structured you are, how robust you are as a business or an individual, you will suffer from stress. So we cannot eliminate stress, but what you're trying to do is mitigate the outcome of it, the extent of it. Any questions? Checking my watch. How are we doing for time, Nat? Any? It's 20 past 10. Any questions from the? No, they're all quite online. Okay. Before I move on from that, because now I'm going to start looking at being more solutions focused. Does anybody want a further clarification or a question or a comment? Doing very well. You all look a little bit like you'd like me to be quiet now, so you can go and have a cup of tea. But I'm going to do a slight bit more content, and then we'll go out for a cup of tea. Okay. All right. So that's just understanding. So what I would say to everybody here is that personality and that mental toughness, that comes down to self-awareness. If you don't understand what you look like under pressure, ask your family. Definitely ask your children. Yeah. They'll spot it a mile away. Really what we want to do in terms of managing stress for both ourselves and our business is we need to think about it as a kettle. So a kettle whistling is far too late, and a kettle doesn't whistle instantly. So a business or an individual that's self-aware understands when the kettle has been switched on, and intervenes before it whistles. So if you're severely stressed and it manifests as screaming and shouting or shutting down completely and retracting from friends, business, etc., or getting fed up, that is absolutely the kettle has whistled. And you need to think about, you need to know what are the indicators that you're going down the wrong path or you're going down a dangerous path. Okay, so you should know if we're looking at anger management, it will be spotting the signals before the person gets angry. And they often manifest themselves physically. So it could be a clenching of fists, it could be a setting of jaw, it could be a lot of people say, oh, I know when I roll my eyes, I'm about to get myself in trouble. Okay. Do you know what your own personal warning signs are that you are getting in trouble along that stress? I lose my keys. I lose my keys anyway, but I lose my keys excessively when I'm stressed, okay? So I know that about myself. I'm now so self-aware about it that if I lose my keys once, I panic because I'm like, oh God, am I stressed? I didn't know I was stressed. What's happened? So we need to be careful that we are rational in this as well. It's not about being so... When I'm describing what I do to people, I'm quite reluctant to say I'm a psychologist because people start getting a little bit, oh, she's analysing me. Okay. You're not that interesting, tough. But you're thinking about, it's not about being so self-aware that you're afraid to get out of bed in the morning for fear of doing something wrong. It's just having that insight that says, you know what? I normally speak to somebody once a week and I haven't spoken to them for a while. Is that because I'm afraid to speak to them, or is it because they're in trouble? It could be things like saying you're struggling to get out of bed. So there's some really good work around the idea of languishing versus flourishing. So Adam Grant, a really well-known Canadian psychologist, talks about languishing, and a lot of people just found, so what that looks like is reluctant to go to bed and struggling to get up in the morning. They're good indicators of it. Okay, so, and the reason you're reluctant to go to bed is because, you know, once you hit the pillow, the next time you open your eyes, you've got to go through it all again. So if that is a mindset that you have, it's maybe reflecting and saying, why is that happening and what can I put in place? Okay, I could actually just leave it there in a natural cut. I could feel that, yeah, I'm getting the, yes, do, quick tea break. Okay, so we'll have, for the people online, we're going to have like a 15-minute break just for people to grab a cup of tea and coffee. And Paul is going to herd us back into the room and we'll get back on. So what does that give us? I haven't a clock in front of me. It's 20 to 11, so 10:40 we'll be back in the room, please, to start again in the interest of me getting through the slides because I'm only on the first one. So, okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that.
3 days.
We'll come back to what we were doing. So I should try a technique that when I was at university, my professor of my undergraduate course was one of the lead terrorist negotiators in Europe. And what he used to do to get the attention of the room was he would drop his voice really quietly. And he'd speak like that. And then he'd just get to a point of moving his mouth. And the whole room would stop and start to listen in. So while most of us will raise our voice to get attention, he used to drop his voice. I can never do it because I start giggling when I try to do it. But okay, so thank you for coming back to the room. So just to continue on with what we're doing, so obviously it's great to get some comments from the room, or if we haven't anything online yet, but please do feel free to put in a comment or ask a question. I would be delighted to take it. And again, I'm speaking generically because I'm aware that it isn't a closed room, so anything that you do ask will be handled sensitively. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. I appreciated points when I was speaking earlier that for some people it was evoking some emotions of previous experiences or behaviour, so I am more than happy to speak to anybody after this session should they wish to, and if you haven't time today, I'm sure we can organise it. I have another 3.5 weeks left in Australia, so I will catch you somewhere. And by all means, if you have friends or people in the other regions and there's a workshop on, please send them my way. I would be delighted to see them. I think if you're what I call a repeat offender, we've decided that you're going to call you a hefty as opposed to a swifty. So I'm delighted. It makes it very enjoyable for me to come into a room and to meet people I've seen before, because it has that shared background that allows us to start some good conversations. So speaking about stress and stress management, I'm conscious that I'm walking away from the camera here, and it's just a voice being projected into the room. But so speaking of stress and the need for resilience, sharpening the saw, looking after yourself, looking for opportunities to make your business robust, taking the time, even in very, very stressful situations, to pause, take a breath, get your head out of the chaos, and look for small things to be grateful for. We know that creates a huge amount of personal resilience. As I mentioned, the research on gratitude. So for all of the things that you might be experiencing or have experienced, where are the little glimmers? Where are the little things that you can anchor to while you're feeling lost at sea? Okay, so I'm going to look at some of the techniques that we can use as individuals. And again, anything I speak about in terms of like, I do a lot of work about time management on a dairy farm, but actually personal time management is the same skill set. So anything I'm using on the business, we can bring back to the person. Anything that works well for you as a person, you can scale it up to your business. Okay, so it might be the comment that I try to be organized and structured in my personal life, and I have found that has helped my work life. Or having been really organized and structured in my work life, I decided to bring some of that skill set back to my personal life. Okay, so the computer has paused again, and I'm going to be very calm and not panic, because I'm well able to keep talking, and I'm going to invite Nat up to do that. Apologies. Okay. So, technology. So that's something, I suppose, a little bit out of our control that can cause problems for an individual such as myself. And it's when you see the person trying to fix it for you panicking as well, that's when you start panicking. Excellent. Right. So, there are many, many things. I'm going to bring this board over. I may go out of the view of the camera, so apologies. But there are many, many things that we can control that compromise our ability to be rational and competent in a situation. Okay? So if we were looking at, I appreciate the camera may not be able to see this, so I'll describe what I'm doing. I'm drawing a highly, highly accurate representation of the brain, very detailed. Okay? And why I'm doing this is because the more we understand about the brain, the easier it is to engage it appropriately. So this is really, really important. When we understand how to use the brain as a tool, we become far more effective from a stress management, time management, or productivity point of view. And we end up being able to work with it in a positive way. So at its most basic, a lot of research around the idea of system 1 and system 2. So this is the animal brain, system 1. We have a lot more animal brain than we have human brain. So this is the limbic system. Obviously, all of the rest of the brain isn't the limbic system as part of it, but just to demonstrate that our brain is far more wired like an animal's brain than it is like a human brain. Okay, the executive function or the prefrontal cortex of the human brain is actually quite small proportion to the rest of the brain. That is what sets us aside as king of the chain. But the problem with it is that unless we are highly trained individuals, we will revert to system 1. This is a very, very well-known book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who died recently, within the last month. And he won a Nobel Prize in economics, despite being a psychologist, because he demonstrated to the world that humans aren't rational. They're emotional. And they have many, many thought processes that have been brought forward from caveman days that haven't been overridden yet. So we have a lot of default mechanisms that can get us in trouble. Okay. Once you understand that and spot those, when we look at the psychology of persuasion and influence, it's very easy to manipulate people until they know they're being manipulated, and then you cannot manipulate them anymore. Okay, so once we create that awareness, you can't use it anymore. Okay? Once you understand how your brain works and catches you out, or trips you up, or isn't your friend, then you can put something in place to prevent that. However, considering your own age, you need to realize that if you have default mechanisms that you haven't overridden, you have very well embedded neural pathways. So from a farming perspective, you can think of a neural pathway as a farm road. A very well embedded farm road is going to take the weight of the cattle, it's going to take the weight of machinery, it's going to still be there despite severe flooding if it's really, really well compacted and made. That's how human behavior, that's what human behavior looks like. Well embedded farm roads, so your neural pathways, and they are what we call habits. Okay? But habits are something that you've practiced and made, so you can undermine them, you can change them, you can enhance them, or you can erode them and get rid of them. Okay? The first point, though, is you need to understand what are the simple things that if you know them, are going to enhance your ability to what you really want to do, or what you want to be looking at is, particularly under pressure, is you want to engage system 2 or the human brain and not allow system 1 to sabotage you. Okay? Now, there's a really excellent book, the very famous book of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. There is a really useful book called The Chimp Paradox, and I use that a lot. So if that's a book, if you're interested in what I'm speaking about in this idea, The Chimp Paradox is a good introductory text to this idea. Okay, and then once you read that, you can dip into the Thinking Fast and Slow. So The Chimp Paradox is by Steve Peters. He was a neurosurgeon. He became a psychiatrist. He's now a very, very high-profile sports psychologist. And he works with elite athletes, many of whom will be at the peak of their sport, getting gold medals at Olympics, world champions. And he works with them to stop their chimp sabotaging them. So the chimp paradox, this is the chimp. The chimp paradox, and it's a paradox because the chimp is your best friend and your worst enemy. And it's your best friend because it's the chimp that says, run as fast as you can, you're going to be gored by a bull. Run as fast as you can, you are going to be hit by a truck. Survive, survive, survive. However, it is also the chimp that makes you speak before thinking and get you into a lot of trouble. Engage brain before mouth, okay? Really good one recently popped into my head, somebody was speaking yesterday. Effective leadership, you should aim to be a hippo. No, sorry, you should aim to be an elephant, not a hippo. Okay, so firstly, a hippo in leadership thinking is high position power, hippo, high position power. And when people are in high position power, they feel obligated to speak or to speak more. What you see with highly effective leadership is that hippos behave more like elephants and not like hippos, the animal. And what I mean by that is a hippo has tiny ears and a big mouth, which means they listen little and speak lots. An elephant, tiny mouth, big ears. Okay, so leadership should be striving to be an elephant, not a hippo. The hippo with the big mouth can get itself in trouble. So when we look at somebody who's capable and competent, has a competent understanding of how their brain can sabotage them, they're in a position to be more like the elephant than the hippo. And as much as they want to throw in an old grenade, an incendiary device to blow up the conversation, they know that it is not the right and proper thing to do, okay? So the chimp is your best friend and your worst enemy. One of the challenges is that the chimp was developed at a time when there were severe exposure to life survival. Like everything was a threat. Life expectancy was very, very low. Every day surviving a day was the equivalent of surviving years nowadays, basically. So the brain is very hardwired still, despite being technologically advanced, hugely technologically advanced in every society that we have today. The brain hasn't actually evolved a huge amount from when we were cave people. So what do we see now? What we see now is that the equivalent of the lion attacking us or the animal attacking us or a shortage of food, they're things like flippant comments from people. They're things like negative feedback. They're things like abusive talk. They're things like name calling and taunting and bullying. They are the equivalent of the lion. Having to survive floods, having to survive world milk price, all of those things, they are now the line that we deal with. But our mechanisms for survival and managing that, our system 1, hasn't evolved to understand that they're not big immediate, they're threats, but they're not immediate threats. They're not life threats. Does everybody understand that? Okay. But we respond to them as if they're life threats. Our body responds to them if they're life threats. And so we start to generate lots of different hormone that allows us to go straight into survival mechanisms, which are what? What's the typical survival mechanism? We're going to flight, fight, and there's a last one? Freeze, or fright, okay? So we've got the fight, flight, and fright mechanism still there. The problem with this is it's also compounded by the fact that if we were a Stone Age and we went and there was a threat, we then probably shifted our entire home to somewhere else physically. So we were able to dissipate the hormone through exercise, through walking, through all of those things. We don't have that opportunity anymore. What's happening now is people aren't physically able, they aren't as physically active, and as a result, they're not able to, what's the word? I want to use a good word, I can't think of the word. I was going to say expunge, it's not the right word. You're not able to cope with the reserve, the build-up. It's building, the hormone stays and it's built up because you're not actually getting rid of it through physical exercise that you would have done had you been in a migratory type tribe. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So system 1 and system 2. What an elite athlete, special forces, they are trained excessively in the ability to divert to system 1. What we find, however, with humans is humans are very poor at transferring skills. Another book, if you're interested in it, is a book called The Marshmallow Test by Walter Mischel. So I don't know if you have the Haribo, if you ever had the Haribo ad. So the Haribo is the German sweet confectionery, and they have a child with sweets in front of them. And the idea was they studied children, and they got children, they put attempting a treat in front of children, and they said, you can have that now, or you can wait for an amount of time while I go out and do something, and you can have twice what you've got, or you can have another one. And what they found was that the children who could delay gratification on a longitudinal study performed far better in life. Okay? So of course, when the researchers said, we're going to pop outside, we need to do something, they were actually watching how the children use strategies to manage that scenario, to delay gratification. What the book also demonstrates, however, is that we only have a certain amount of ability to delay gratification and our processing capacity, and that we often don't transfer it to other areas of our lives. Okay, so that research demonstrates that a skill set in one place, humans don't necessarily apply to another place, unless their awareness is brought to that idea. Okay? So for example, if I was speaking to a room of dairy farmers about employment, being an employer of choice, I would say you already have an abundance of this skill set because you're used to dealing with animals. You have skills that make you good at animal husbandry, that put you ahead of most people because they don't understand how humans perform under pressure. You know, with the cow, if you scream and shout at the cow, she's going to, if she can, run away. If she's trapped, she's going to fight, or she's going to cower, which is fright. So you know productivity drops, you know the whole thing goes wrong if you're screaming and shouting at a cow. Of course, under pressure and stress, we still scream and shout at the cow, even though we know that's not a clever or big thing to do, okay? So the idea is we need to think about transferring those skill sets and looking for the skills that we have and understanding how we can bring those things to other places, all right? Does that make sense? It could be about finance. So one of the things, a lot of farmers, they struggle to understand finance, which doesn't make any sense because finance is about investment and long-term return, which of course, if you are doing crops, you're putting a lot of work and effort in today to get a return in the future. That is the exact same thing as finance and investment. The skill set is already there, so we need to transfer it. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to find skills we already have that will help us to override this, but we need to be self-compassionate because while we might be amazing in one area, we mightn't necessarily bring it to the other area. So what we will find is people who are highly disciplined in one area, unless you draw their attention to the fact it's useful elsewhere, they won't use it. Is everybody with me? There's a little bit of kind of nodding, okay? All right, so we're looking again at the human brain. Understanding how the human brain works is going to help you to be much better at coping with stress, etc., because you're not going to allow the chimp or default mechanisms that haven't been overridden to sabotage you. Yeah? Okay. So when we look at the chimp brain, there are some simple things that you can absolutely control that are going to help you be more like a human. And that's what this is about. So this is a really well-known model of motivation. When I studied first, when I was doing my master's, there was a lecture on motivation, and I distinctly remember sitting there going, this is it. This topic is fantastic. I love it. I'm going to do it for my master's thesis, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life looking at this idea. And at the end of it, the lecturer said, and don't even think about trying to measure this or investing any more time in it, because it is not measurable. So motivation is not measurable. We see very little advance in motivation theory from this model. Very little. We're looking at 1940s, 1950s. And the reason is that motivation is so transient and fickle that it's impossible to measure it. For example, at 9 o'clock today, you were motivated to come into the room and sit down. If halfway through you decided you didn't like what I was saying, you might have been motivated to get out of the room. You were probably motivated to go and have your cup of coffee. And by the time we finished, you'd be motivated to go and have food. So even within the space of 3 hours, there's a number of different motivations that will have gone through your head. Therefore, impossible to measure. There are different motivations at different times of your life. There are different motivations based on different situations. So it's a very, very tricky one to measure. So what we should be looking for, you should be striving for commitment, not talking about motivation. Okay, which is quite an interesting idea. Because I have a number of workshops called Motivating and Managing of People coming up shortly across Australia. But actually what we want to do is use what we do know about motivation to generate commitment. Okay, now commitment is what the agricultural community will call work ethic. The ability to stick with something even when you feel like you don't want to. That word feel, that's motivation. I don't feel like doing that now. If we listen to our motivations, most of you would probably not be farming anymore, because you'd have triggered, you'd have made an action on that feeling and said, oh, I don't feel like doing this anymore, and you'd have exited. Okay? That's listening to your motivation. That's when you have to get up at stupid o'clock in the morning. Stupid o'clock for me, because I'm not a morning person, so I think you're all weird, right? But stupid o'clock is saying, I remember there's a pillar there, I need to reverse. Stupid o'clock in the morning when you go, I don't feel like getting up today, but because I'm committed to my business, because I'm committed to my lifestyle, because I'm committed to paying off the debt I'm in, I will override that momentary motivation and I will get up. Does everybody understand that? But what we can do is use aspects of motivation to keep us encouraged through that commitment. At its most basic level, we're talking again here about compromising our ability to, so if we don't manage certain things, we're automatically activating system 1, the animal brain. Anybody in this room tell me when they're not at their best performance, what compromises you physiologically straight away? Hungry, better known as hangry. Okay, so hungry, angry, no fuel, can't be logical in my process. My head has gone into, I need to eat. Survival mechanism, absolutely right, hungry, thank you. Anybody else?
Sleep.
Who said sleep? Sleep, James, absolutely, so sleep, totally compromised. Huge amount of research on sleep now. Terrifying, terrifying. When we look at sleep. Look at the diminish of if we look at the American workforce, it has gone from 8.5 hours to 6.25 max. And there's people in this room going, 6.25, I wish, okay? It is terrifying, the detriment on your body of not sleeping. To the extent that the European Union prior to COVID was looking at abolishing daylight saving hours. 1 hour. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say. 1 hour on the day we lose the hour, so we feel we have to get up earlier, across a large number of accident and emergency departments, across a huge amount of time, we have data that says heart attacks increase by 24% based on that hour lost. And there is an equivalent reduction on intake of heart attack on the day we get the hour back. An hour. So for those of you who dismiss sleep and say, oh, I'll sleep long enough when I'm dead, more fool you. Sleeping is one of the best investments you can give to yourself. Huge amount of fantastic research by a guy called Steve Walker. Well worth looking at on YouTube videos, clips, podcasts, TED Talks, everything else. If you find that he is being discredited on the internet, it's because he is anti-sleeping tablets, which creates sedation, not sleep. He is anti-alcohol, which creates sedation, not sleep. He is anti-smoking. He has gone against the 3 biggest lobbies in America. Of course, he's going to be undermined. But his research, his sleep lab, it is really robust. He's a professor of sleep in University of California, Berkeley. Amazing stuff. Okay. Question, Simone.
When it comes to sleep, are there either genetic differences between people and their requirements and or gender differences?
Simone, from the stuff I have read, no. There are people who go, I don't need sleep, I'm awesome. Okay, so not specifically I'm going to say, but I don't know fully, maybe something to look into. What they would say is the 2 most important factors, room temperature and a consistent getting up and sleep time. Even at the weekends, not being seduced into the lie-in. The lie-in is not productive for sleep. Okay, so consistent waking up, consistent going to bedtime, and they're the 2 main factors. Room temperature, consistent getting up and going to sleep. If another thing that Matthew Walker speaks about, which I find absolutely fascinating and is absolutely related he is a psychologist. He talks about if you are somebody who struggles to sleep, you actually shouldn't stay in your bedroom trying to fall asleep. You should remove yourself from the bedroom, because what happens is you start associating your bedroom with something negative. You start walking into your bedroom and going, oh my God, what if I can't sleep? And so you remove yourself and then you go back to it. I think, were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was
Justin?
going to say that I used to use my ability to operate on very little sleep as a badge of honor. And it was sort of ingrained in me from a young age, so that was sort of what farmers did. And so it's taken me a long time, and looking at some of the very dramatic research about how bad it is for your long-term health to change that behaviour that I've done for years. And it's made a big difference, actually.
So comment from the room, just saying about having worn a lack of sleep as a badge of honour. Is there anything specific that you have changed or convinced yourself to do that previously you might have dismissed?
I'm more just taking it seriously about actually making an effort to get more sleep.
Okay, so consciously investing in the idea of sleep and not dismissing it as an unnecessary.
Or as an optional thing, like it was the first thing that would get taken away if there was more work to be done on a particular day. Sleep was the first low-end.
The first reduction. Yeah, a great comment. So the comment from the room is that sleep was the first thing to be compromised if other things were going on, when in reality, sleep should be protected probably above everything else. To be in a position of capability, really, to be able to manage and to cope, because everything is exacerbated if you're tired. Everything feels more extreme. Your language is more extreme, your behavior is more extreme, your tolerance is your intolerance. Your tolerance is less extreme, your intolerance is more extreme. And so you're absolutely compromising your ability to activate system 2 rational thinking. You have sent yourself straight in here. System 1, animal behavior, not rational, not logical, likely to get you in trouble. Okay, it's a cracking comment, thanks for that. I think that is really common. In agriculture, sleep, badge of honour, lack of sleep. Okay, yeah, other comments in the room.
I may have misheard, but I just referred to a Steve Walker and a Matthew Walker. Are they 2 different?
Oh, sorry, I did actually say that, you're right, and I did afterwards go Matthew Walker, excuse me. It's Matthew Walker is Steve Walker, I think, was a New Zealand long-distance walker, or the New Zealanders gone, I don't know, don't ask me. Somebody Walker was the second person to do the sub 4-minute mile, but anyway, okay, Matthew Walker, apologies and thanks for clarification. So Matthew Walker, really, really interesting, speaks a lot about a sleep divorce. So it's about sleeping in separate room to protect your sleep, that it's actually really powerful for marital relationships to have a sleep divorce. It would be excellent if you're a block calving scenario, to protect your sleep, because you've got that very intense amount of time to take that time to protect your sleep. And put a deadline on it. So if you're worried about it impacting your relationship, just put a deadline on it and say, right, during calving, we'll have a sleep divorce, and then we can come back to thinking about what we're doing moving forward. But we know that sleep is one of the key factors you need to protect if you want to make good decisions at any time. If you want to activate prefrontal cortex, executive function, the human brain. Great. So we've hungry, we've got sleep. I went on my rant there about sleep. Anything else? Angry. Okay, so emotion, so built up. Typically that's going to be triggered by something. What might it have been triggered by that you're angry? Something broke our frustration, and now because we're angry, we've defaulted into animal brain, which is not rational, it's not logical. Okay. I think I might do a well-known test of the emotional and rational brain. I'll give it a go. Okay. Where's my Paul? Do you know how to do that? Oh no, I have it. Excellent, right. So this is the difference between emotional and rational. Okay, so this comes from Daniel Kahneman. If you know the answer, please don't scream it out. A bat and a ball equals one. Oh, and use a different pen, thank you. A bat and a ball. Do you know what? I'll use my own. They might be a bit thicker. Right. So, a bat and a ball. This, by the way, sounds like I'm doing a maths class. I'm not. What I'm looking at is a demonstration of a rational versus emotional thinking. So, a bat plus a ball equals, I was going to go euros, $1.10. The bat is exactly the price of the ball plus $1. Oh, again, I've done pound signs and all sorts in there. How much is the ball? A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat is exactly $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? I had a hand up over here. Giving somebody, just shout it out. I'm not even gonna, oh damn you, she got the right answer. Okay, the most people are gonna actually have said what? 10 cents, thank you. Class Peck, get out. Okay.
No, I'm terrible at maths, so I don't know how that happens.
Okay, so the 10 cent, which is the vast majority of you, are going to think is an intuitive answer. Okay, it's an intuitive answer. Everybody understand that? It's your gut reaction, straight away, 10 cent. However, if you had a stop, think, act mechanism and followed that through, you'd have realized that if, in fact, the ball was 10 cent, okay, and the bat was exactly $1 more, that would make the bat 110. 110 plus 10 cents is equal to $1.20. So it can't have been 10 cents. But the intuitive reaction stops you playing that out. Now, the thing is, 80% of the population will say 10 cents. That is not for the other 20% to be smug. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. What it is that it demonstrates, and this comes from Amos Tversky, who won a Nobel Prize for economics, to demonstrate that most people make decisions intuitively or emotionally or on a gut instinct. Okay? The problem with doing that is gut instinct and emotion only works if you have lots of prior experience. And it doesn't work if you're projecting into the future as an unknown. You need to be a rational thinker if you're projecting forward. Is everybody with me? So it's a perfect example. I did not work that out. My husband's an accountant, did it straight away. It took me 3 months to get my head around that. I spent ages going, why? Why is it 5 cents? I used to attack him at random times when he least expected it, going, why is the ball 5 cents? Your comment?
It was actually because you repeated it twice. If you had just said it once.
Ah, yeah, okay.
That because you repeated it twice.
You knew there was a trick.
I have to repeat it in my mind, so I repeated it twice.
Okay, so the repeating of it twice allowed you the opportunity to maybe stop. I would say to all of you, if there's a psychologist in the room asking you to do something, there's a trick. Okay, so it should have been a warning that said, what is she actually asking us here, okay? So the reason I use it, even when we look at a place like Harvard, which takes like the top percentile of academic ability in the world, 50% of Harvard students will go for the 10 cent. Okay? The problem is, if you've got a lot of default to intuitive thinking, you're going to get yourself in trouble when it comes to really important decision making. That's why we need to start in building an override that is stop, think, act. It's going to make you make much better informed decisions. Are you going to say something? No? All right. All right, I'll leave you with that one. There'll be people in the room still going, I don't get it, I still don't get it. Okay, that's all right. What was that, sorry? Did you get it today? Okay, so it's taken somebody in the room since Friday to actually get it. And it may well have been the way I said it, so I'll remember, I'm going to make it more complicated in future. I don't like when people get it straight away because it insults my vanity that it took me flipping 3 months to get it. Anyway, so we've got things that are going to compromise. So anger was a great one. We're not rational. We're defaulting into animal brain. We're allowing the chimp to sabotage us. Okay, that's the chimp paradox. We're allowing the chimp to sabotage us. We're allowing system 1 to override rational thinking. So we're back to my very detailed picture of the human brain. We're allowing this to activate, and that can get us in trouble. So we've got things here. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the understanding behind this is that if any of the previous layers are compromised, you're inhibited from getting to the next layer. Okay? So simple things that are absolutely controllable can make your life easier. We had a great comment from the room about protecting sleep has actually made life easier. That's a basic brick in the structure. Do not underestimate sleep. Be devastated for anybody who thinks that it's clever to talk about not getting sleep. It is very, very damaging. Things like warmth, so temperature can be a source of stress. If you're over, we see actually when we look at emotional intelligence, if you look at the results in emotional intelligence, we see a skew on Middle East, Mediterranean, South America. They have lower levels of emotional control on the moods management structure, and that is probably largely due to heat exacerbates mood, exacerbates anger. Okay, so heat exacerbates anger. Basic one there. For the next one, we've got things like safety needs, protection, security, order, law, limits, and stability. Speaking very frequently about being an employer of choice in the workplace, the vast majority of businesses that I go into that are under pressure retaining staff have collapsed their own system and have set themselves up to fail by not protecting that layer. And what that layer looks like is protection is, could be so safety would be health and safety, psychological safety, honouring the psychological contract, so people entering the business in the same state that they left it, whether that's physically or emotionally. It could be as straightforward as order, law and limits, rosters, job allocation, they're order, law and limits. So having those in place, I go to so many businesses and they'll say things like, oh, I had an employee and they were fantastic in the beginning, but something's happened to them, they're no good now. They were full of energy in the beginning. In the vast majority of situations, when I follow up with, have you rosters and task allocation in place? And they'll go, no, I don't bother doing that. But of course that person can't maintain their motivation if they don't know what's ahead of them. How can they possibly distribute their energy and their investment if they don't know what's ahead of them? Okay? Totally controllable, by the way. Layer 1 and layer 2 in a first world country, controllable. Totally controllable. In a less affluent country, some of those things are luxury. Okay? We then move up to things like belongingness, love and needs, family, affection, relationships and work group. And what we'll see here is something like my boss is really decent, really like them, but I just can't get home on time. I can't get back, I'm contracted to work at a certain time, and they keep me longer, and now I can't collect my kids from school or from preschool or from my neighbour. And so I never get a chance to genuinely appreciate the person because they've undermined themselves by not allowing me to do what I need to do in my own life. Okay? And in the end, I stop thinking they're a nice person, and I actually start thinking that I start becoming resentful of that employer, and I start seeing that employer as a thief because they're stealing time from me. They're stealing time from my family. And that doesn't take long for that relationship to go sour. The struggle with people management is it takes a long time to create to deposit trust and respect, and you can erode it in an instant. You can diminish it all by a stupid statement, a flippant comment, or one silly behavior. That is the challenge with people management. I say to I haven't said it in Australia, but I say it to nearly every group I go into, people management, do it well or don't do it at all. But dabbling is really dangerous. Because dabbling the risk of dabbling is people can tell a story about you outside the farm gate. Okay? So the idea here is control what you can control in order to create stability, a bit like the question from the room earlier. If you're robust, if your foundation is robust and strong, then it's going to be easier to take the turbulence on top. It is frustrating to me to see businesses struggling to keep staff based on things they could have absolutely controlled. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Get things in place. Why do we see this particularly in agriculture, a lack of rosters and a lack of planning? Because people in agriculture have done that work all their lives, it's all in their head and they struggle to get it out on paper. If that is you, learn. Okay, and if you can't do it, get somebody to ask you enough questions that helps you to get that out onto paper. Okay, right. I just come to one of my employer of choice workshops. There's lots of those, lots of ideas about what I'm speaking about and models that I use on the Dairy Australia YouTube channel, so it can support the ideas with that. This does get criticised as a very Western model because people say, oh, well, in Eastern religions and Eastern philosophy, they will talk about self-denial and fasting and all of those things. I have to challenge that idea. Because if I choose to fast and to abstain, if I'm in a religion that chooses to abstain and to fast, that's a choice. In a war zone, I can absolutely guarantee that everybody comes right back down to here, to the part where you'd let your mother die to feed yourself. Okay? That's an extreme scenario. So we need to be mindful of how this plays out. That a lot of these things at the bottom, we take them for granted. They are luxuries in other countries. Because we take them for granted, we may well be complacent or flippant. You need to get those structures into your workplace. It also gives you the stability to cope and be resilient when things are going wrong, because at least those small things that are totally controllable don't wreck your head when they don't happen. Okay. Any questions on that before I move on, either from the room or online? Any comments? I love the comment about sleep. Thank you for that. It was a great comment. Deathly silence. Tough crowd. Okay. Moving on, right. So we're looking, I call this People Management 101. People Management 101, a basic survival mechanism for keeping people engaged in your business. Feed them, okay? Keep the bellies of the troops full to keep morale up. You will see that in every military text you've ever come across. You will see it in all the ancient texts of Caesars and Roman leaders, Greek leaders, Egyptian leaders. If you were looking at leadership, there's nothing new in leadership either. You could read Sun Tzu, The Art of War from 300 BC, and it will quite early on say, feed the troops, an army cannot march on an empty stomach. Okay? Great. So we're looking at that and we're looking for opportunities. So in terms of action for yourselves, it could be taking on that challenge of getting better sleep. That could be something that you move forward from today. It could be the challenge of protecting your break times and not allowing them to slide in your day. Well, I'm out and I'm about, I'll just keep going and I'll feed myself eventually. I'll get in for breakfast eventually. I'll go for lunch eventually. That is a really silly thing to do because you're compromising your ability to perform based on the fact that when we're hungry, we've activated the chimp. Chimp gets a bit annoyed with us and we're not rational in our thinking, and then because we're hungry and we're not getting anywhere, we get angry. And then we start escalating all of those negatives, okay? A couple of nods and smiles going on there, so that probably sounds familiar to a lot of people. Any comments or any questions? Yes?
Well, on that pyramid, where would religion come in? You mentioned the Eastern philosophy, so
Okay.
if someone that's religious wants their Sundays off, or
That would actually,
once in the morning,
it comes...
prayer times a day.
it comes to, it will come up to somewhere like, unless it's a very imposed religion in the sense that you're going to be punished for not complying to the religion, for the most part of its choice, it's coming in here because that's where you get your needs, for your affiliation needs, your belongingness, being part of that congregation. So it's typically up here. But honestly, under pressure, religion becomes, we might, look, there's an expression, there's no atheists in foxholes. Like under pressure, everybody believes in God because they start praying for help. You know, please God help me. So we do all of a sudden, even as we said, no atheists in foxholes, we will start like looking for help or looking for divine help. And that's why we would see religion being far more entrenched in poorer countries, because we're looking for something to latch onto when other things have been undermined. That answer? Yeah, thanks, Simon. Okay. Right, so I didn't repeat that question, but the question was about where does religion fit into the hierarchy? Okay, great question. Anybody else? Lovely question. No? We're good. Let's hope my slides move on. They do. So, when we want to be not distracted, when we want to be robust, it's very important to know what your why is, because that's where you generate commitment. Again, we're looking at a very well-known piece of work by Simon Sinek, Start with Why. When you understand what your why is, it's much easier to commit. We mentioned many of them last night in the room when I asked, what is worth protecting? What is the wealth of the dairy industry? What is the value of it? What's worth protecting? And we heard things like autonomy, we heard working with animals, we heard community. All of those things are worth protecting. When you understand that, or maybe it's work-life balance, or maybe it's succession, or maybe it's wealth creation, when you understand what your why is, you've got something to anchor to under pressure. There is a huge challenge in agriculture that many people farm because they can, not because they chose to. Okay, and that's because they inherited the asset. And so we see in those scenarios, we see people who can be miserably unhappy because they're doing something they never wanted to do but felt obliged to. And I have been in a room where, describing this idea, there was a gentleman in the room and he physically moved himself back from the rest of the group, tears streaming down his face, very, very unhappy, because I was describing everything he'd felt all his life. He was farming because he had to, because he felt obliged to, not because he wanted to. Now, I'm sitting in a room of people who are committed to dairy farming. I'm standing in a room of people who are committed to dairy farming, and you guys find it tough. So imagine if you don't want to be there. That's a really tough gig. So when people exit the industry, be slow to judge. Be very slow to judge. Come across this a lot. One of the things I find, I heard the expression first in Tasmania about tall poppy syndrome. And they often talk about the challenge with dairy is nobody's willing to stand up and talk positively about it. And that in Tasmania is, you know, that idea of the tall poppy syndrome is, well, if you stand up and you express yourself, you get your head cut off. I actually genuinely believe, working with many dairy industries, that the reason farmers are slow to stand up and say how well things are going is because at any point their neighbours might be suffering or somebody else is suffering. And so it's actually empathy, because while my business is going well today, there are times when it hasn't. And while my business is going well today, somebody else is suffering. So I think there's a lot of empathy, a lot of emotional intelligence in farming that means people don't want to stand up and say how amazing their business is, because that's hurting somebody who isn't in as positive a situation as they are. So what we need to do, instead of talking about individual business success, is talk about all the positive things that were discussed last night as the industry. What is the industry doing well? So for people in the room who are slow to stand up because they don't want to big up their business, you don't need to big up your business. Big up the industry. Big up why the industry is a great place to be. And that removes you from feeling embarrassed. That helps you to remain humble. A lot of people don't want to, I don't want to be showing off. I don't want to talk about my success. But in fact, if you're talking about the industry, you're a step removed then, and it makes it much easier to talk about. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's not, because you're successful, it doesn't mean you have to go and say all the brilliant things you're doing. But you do need to big up the industry. You do need to create reputation for the industry, and everybody in the industry, but particularly the dairy farmers, are the best brand ambassadors for the industry. If you want to attract people into the industry, you need to sell the industry. If you struggle to sell the industry because you're terrified of talking positively about your own business, don't talk about your business. Talk about the advantages of being in the industry. Does everybody understand that? That's going to create sustainability in the dairy industry. I was speaking at a conference in Ireland last year. The head of research stood up and gave a really powerful talk for an hour about the environmental issues that Ireland will face having doubled the national herd in 5 years, the consequences of that. By the way, I have no sympathy for any farmer involved in that. That was a choice to do that, and there is a cost. I have been in rooms in Irish dairy industry and said, you had your cake, you now need to pay for it. So we need to take consequence for that. The Irish industry needs to be held accountable for environmental impact. It's a fact. There's no point in whinging about it. However, I can't remember why I said that. Why did I go into that? It'll come back to me.
Rather than individual success, talking about community and group and industry success.
You're close, but I can't remember. I was at the conference. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. It's always lovely when somebody remembers what I said, because I don't. Yeah, just moved class pet status over there. Okay, so absolutely right. So the head of research speaking for a really detailed hour about environment. And when asked, what's the biggest challenge for the Irish dairy industry, he said, labour. Okay, that's the sustainability issue. We can talk all day about everything else, but the sustainability issue is keeping people in the industry, attracting people into the industry to allow you to be able to implement environment, animal welfare, animals, all of those things. You need people there. That's the sustainability issue. However, if from the outside, this is a challenge that you need to challenge yourselves about. If from the outside I see you working hard all day, and then I see you coming into an industry meeting or a local discussion group or whatever it is in the evening, therefore you never switch off from your business, I'm standing there going, yeah, not that interested in that industry. That looks a little bit too much like hard work. In the meantime, my expression of that looks like too much hard work means I get shot down by the industry because I'm accused of having no work ethic. Okay? Work ethic and work practices are two different things. You can get, I was in a room in Queensland on Monday, and we were discussing, somebody said, so what you're saying is you could have your rosters and task allocation planned out for a year. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So what I find is that dairy is far more complicated than non-dairy people realize. Nowhere near as complicated as dairy farmers make it. Okay, so I'm throwing in that grenade and I'm saying simplify your systems if you want to be attractive to the outside world. Okay, now all professions complicate their own profession because it creates a business opportunity for themselves. Think of the big, long, wieldy contract that well, as your solicitor, I'll read that for you, okay? So all professions complicate themselves to protect themselves in terms of a business idea. The simpler your system is, the easier it is for people to buy into it. Give people the least path of resistance. Might not be invited back after those statements. Right, so what's your why? We know what you do. We're sick of hearing what you do. You milk cows, we know you milk cows. You milk cows in a dairy business, that's your strategy. Your strategy to milk cows is being a dairy business, but why do you do all this? And how this comes into play really powerfully, selling the industry, is advertising your job. There is nothing more frustrating for a person like myself to look at a dairy publication or an agricultural publication that says, I need somebody to work in my business to do 14 milkings a week, blah, 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 and saying that to an informed industry, to an informed reader. If I'm from agriculture and I'm reading what you do in your business, I know what you do, you're dairy farmers. Of all the dairy farmers in the country, however, why would I go to you? That's what you've got to attract me on, not what you do. I know what you do, I'm from agricultural background, I know that dairy farmers milk cows. So why would I come to you? And what that looks like is fantastic discussion I had in Western Australia. Love surfing, come milk my cows. Simple. Love surfing. Why would you come to me? How are you going to surf? How are you going to surf? By being an employee in my business because I live right beside the beach. I tapped into the employees' why. One of the challenges in dairy or in agriculture is that employers expect on day one for people to buy into their business as much as they do. It is utterly unrealistic. However, you can earn that right. So you can get somebody into your business because they want to go surfing, but through having a great experience in your business, you can convert them into a passionate advocate for the industry. But to expect them to be like that on day one, you're setting yourself up to fail. Okay? If you can express why it is worth working in your business, you're going to attract far more people than talking about what. What it might look like if you lived in your built-up area, frustrated with your commute and spending time away from family, come work locally. Milk my cows. Why, how, what? Okay? A farmer in Ireland on one of these groups, and he had a chat with, speaking to one of his employees, and there's a lot of research in Ireland to show that the milking interval doesn't actually damage return unless you've got I don't know about the high yielding cows, but in Ireland we tend not to have we don't go for the purebreds. So milking interval doesn't dramatically impact yield or money, but it can make a huge impact if it attracts an employee to stay with you. And so what they did was they had somebody who was doing a long commute and wanted to come and work locally. So they got that person in the gate. Then that person said, well, not only do I not want to do the long commute, but I actually want to collect my children at a certain time. And so that business still is one of the highest yields in Ireland in milk quality, protein, solids, and actually just moved back the milking an hour to allow that person to leave the building, to leave the business. So why am I there? Because I want to spend more time with my family and have a work-life quality. How am I going to do it? I'm going to stay locally. And what am I going to be doing? Working for a dairy farmer. What is your why? And can you express that to the market so you can invite people in to be part of that why as well? I'll give you the example from my own life that I always use. I did a lot of sport. Rowing was my main sport. When I went to university, we struggled. I was 50% of the women's squad, and I didn't like the other girls, so it wasn't great. And so I decided I was going to take this on because it was limiting my potential within the club. And I wrote, some of you may have heard me say it before, but I got coloured paper because in the beginning of term everybody used white paper. So I said, right, I'll be slightly different. I'll draw people's attention. So I used coloured paper. And I wrote in big letters, get fit, get tanned, get out. Join the rowing club today. Okay? The men's side of this squad was very, very competitive and winning lots of stuff, and they were horrified. They were like, we don't want people coming in here who aren't serious and who aren't committed. And I said, well, at this point, we've got nobody coming in. So we need to attract people into the club. And we went from me being 50% to having 70 active women and winning 3 national titles. So what did I do? I tapped into people's why. As a teenager in university, there's no way around it. Physical appearance is a very high priority. So get fit, get tanned, get out taps into 3 very strong whys. The female body of people. How are they going to do it? You're going to come and join the rowing club. So we got them in on their why and we converted them into performing machines. Many of whom stayed in rowing. Okay? So we just need, you can use that by the way. Get fit, get tanned, get out. Come milk my cows. But what you do is really quite irrelevant. Okay, that's just the what. It's down here. But what do we do all the time? Come and work in my business and milk my cows. Not that interesting, to be honest. I'll go somewhere else. Come and stay locally. Fed up with your commute, stay locally. Want job security? Guess what? My farm's not going anywhere. Come and work with me. Okay? Love animals? Come and work with me. That is a challenge because clearly the end of the life cycle of a cow, it's a limited cycle. And so we may attract people into the business who have that love of animals and are horrified at the outcome. That is a risk. However, demonstrating to people that the cow has a quality of life until that point, that may well tap into that person's interest in what you're doing, okay? So if what you're doing isn't sustainable for your business, I've got a radical idea. Change what you're doing, okay? But if you can clearly articulate your own why, it's going to be much easier to demonstrate and sell it, it's going to be much easier to articulate it to people that you want to be part of that business. So get clear on your why. Cracking book, by the way, Simon Sinek. I have it underneath objective strategy and tactics because there's also a fantastic book by Alistair Campbell. He'd been a spin doctor for the Tory government, not the Tory government, for Tony Blair, the Labour government at the beginning of the noughties, and he writes that really, really well. And he talks a lot about process goals. Okay, so it's another interesting one, and he speaks about Australia and different things in it, and the Queen Mother and different things. Not the Queen Mother, the Queen. Okay, any questions on that before I move on? Either online. Online is quiet today. Anybody in the room got a question or a comment? Couple of smiles here and there. No, we good to go? Okay, right. So my next one then is creating sustainable choices. Many people will use a SWOT analysis. You probably don't even think about it, but this is a really clever, rational decision-making tool. Okay? And the reason we need to make rational decisions to be sustainable, to be resilient, is we need to make rational decisions because we are projecting into an unknown, we're projecting into the future. Okay, that's why you need to do something like a SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis also allows you to think all around the idea, right? Forces you to be more even in your judgment. So when we look at a SWOT analysis, we've got the top 2 strengths and weaknesses. As a psychologist, I would never say you have a weakness. I would say you have an area of opportunity or a growth opportunity. We're not going to talk about weaknesses. But in truth, if you've maxed out and you've got no flaws in your system and you're not thriving, then you're in trouble. So never see a weakness as a negative, because a weakness shows that you have the opportunity to be better, okay? So we've got strengths and weaknesses, and they are internal to you, so in relation to a sustainable choice. So you're taking a specific idea and you're running the model, you're running information about that through the model. So your sustainability, you might be looking at a choice, maybe a capital expenditure. Is this a good idea? You would then internally ask yourself, what are your strengths in relation to that? Then what are the weaknesses in your system or in your own capacity in relation to that? So let's take, for example, rather than capital expenditure, let's take, and I mentioned it already, a sustainability issue is labour. So you might decide yourself as an employer, what are my strengths as an employer? I have a well set up system, I've got all of those, you're putting all those things in place. I'm at a phase where I can pay a decent package, or I can create a decent package, or I'm in a really nice location that could be attractive for people to come and work for me. What are my weaknesses? Not great at communicating, struggle to manage my temper, already under pressure, not very good systems, standard operating procedures in place, for example, okay? So we're listing all of those things. Now what's really, really important when we're using a SWOT analysis, so our strengths, we at least, and by the way, you'll get these slides, for our strengths, we're at least maintaining them. If possible, we're increasing them, and we're definitely leveraging them. We're definitely making use of those strengths. For our weaknesses, we're going to define what those weaknesses are and seek solutions so that they're no longer a weakness and we can move it in potentially as a strength. Okay, so in the people management, we might say, I'm not great at communication, I'll attend some communication training. I'm not great at employment, I'll do some leadership training. Okay, so we're defining the problem and we're looking for the solution. What we need to be mindful of, however, excuse me, is that if there's excess weakness, no, it's not that if there's excess weakness, I'll come back to it in a moment. We then decide if we're going to remedy or exit. Like, is that too big a task? Is it too big a challenge? Now, when we are loading the strengths and weaknesses, it is really important that you don't get distracted by the number of entries. Because you could have 50 million strengths and one weakness and go, well, we should go for it. Look, we're very strong in relation to this. But actually the one weakness it's a whopper. Like, it's huge, it's a total deal breaker. So you don't just list, you weight each entry. That makes sense to everybody? And you're disciplined about it. And quite often we are not, we're not so self-aware as to actually understand our strengths and weaknesses. You might bring somebody else involved in that. So we are often self-deprecating rather than self-promoting. And we're quite surprised to hear that other people have a more positive opinion about us than we have of ourselves. So get other people involved to populate your strengths and weaknesses. So that's internal. External, okay? We've got opportunities and threats. So they're external to the business, what's going on in the market world. So this is really important. Rational decision making requires you to take your head out of the business. It requires you to step up and have a look around. Really important, because a SWOT analysis is taking in external concepts as well. So the external opportunities, like what opportunities are out there? Can you seek them? Well, the opportunities available to me to become an employer of choice is Dairy New South Wales or Dairy Australia are providing information around that idea. Okay, so that's an external opportunity. It might be that an external opportunity might be that you know a local business is releasing staff onto the market. Could be that a local business to you is withdrawing from something else, and now all of a sudden there's staff available to you. The opportunity could be you've got a school on your doorstep and you could access school kids to come and be part of your business. Okay, so opportunities available to you. And then what are the threats? And the threats, we need to acknowledge them, plan for those threats and counter them. So the threat is a shortage of employees. The fact is, an employer of choice always has employees regardless of the market. Why? Because word of mouth to date is still the most effective method of referral. And people will keep working. Given a choice, they'll work somewhere that they're happy, that they're safe, both psychologically and physically. And they will make that choice based on other people's recommendations. So that's a form of social proof, a form of persuasion and influence, social proof. If my friend likes working there and we've got similar values, that's why we're friends, the likelihood is I like working there. Equally, because my friend recommended me and I like my friend, I'm not going to let my friend down by acting the maggot when I go into that workplace. Okay? My friend also is not going to damage her own reputation by recommending somebody who won't live up to her reputation in the business already. So actually, word of mouth catches many, many aspects of psychological persuasion that are very, very powerful. Okay. So you should always, when you're looking for new staff, firstly, Tanya Ketteringham is just nodding at me going, oh yes, we know it. And Tanya has a huge background in staff management and sourcing. Firstly, never offered an opportunity outside of your farm gate until you've offered it to your existing staff. Number one, the internal solution is considerably easier. It's a known entity and much cheaper than bringing somebody else in. Okay? And if you're not going to, you need to clearly express to that person why you're not offering it to them. Even better, if you've got a member of staff who you know doesn't have the capacity to do what you need them to do, you still give them the opportunity to jump through the hoops in a certain amount of time so that they can say, strict but fair, I would have loved the job, but I know I'm not capable of it, and therefore I don't resent and will not sabotage the person coming into the business. We should also be going to the people who already exist in your business and saying, so, got any friends? What's your brother up to? Where are your cousins going next year? I know they're finishing school. Because if that person is going to refer somebody to you, the likelihood is they're not going to refer somebody that makes them look bad. So you're onto a winner there already. Am I right, Tanya? Yes. Excellent. That was the correct answer, Tanya. Well done. Okay, so we use something as simple and as routine and as mundane as a SWOT analysis because it has huge, huge power to get the best out of your decision making. It is forcing you to really assess it. And what often happens is, no, I'm afraid to embark risk. We come back to risk. I feel like I have too many weaknesses. But when I sit down and I'm honest with myself, I realize I have loads of strengths. I'm much further along that journey than I realized. It's also a good way to pull the balloon down on somebody who is all gung-ho for a thing without actually thinking about it. Okay, so there are plenty of people who populate the living daylights out of the strengths and go, woohoo, let's go. And then they'll jump on it. Ken, from the room.
So
and you've got to make decisions on the farm to save money. Do you pass that issue or stress through into your staff, or do you manage that? Like how much ownership of the problems of the business do you pass through, or do you not pass? Or do you help them, or is it just a matter of them understanding why you're making the decisions? You know, who owns the issue?
It's a brilliant question. So from the room, if under stress and pressure within the business, how much of that stress and pressure do you pass on to your staff, or how much do you share? Who's involved in that? Who's part of that? I would absolutely say, in terms of compliance and regulation, that should always be passed on to your staff, in the sense that your staff should be held accountable for doing the right thing at the right time. Because if they put antibiotics into the tank, you're going to be caught for that. Okay, so that's a slightly different one. It depends on the maturity of the person in your business and your understanding of that person. So we could see that if you go to and how you want to handle information. So an example I have is a large dairy operation in Cheshire, really in trouble, and couldn't express it to the staff because there was a risk that staff would say it outside the farm gate, and everybody that business owed money to would put a run on the business. They'd come knocking on the door looking for the money because we've heard you're in trouble, give me my money now. And so they couldn't be transparent. Now, how it played out was that everybody thought the boss was being really secretive and difficult. And he wasn't. He was trying to protect the business. And he was hurt, actually personally hurt, that they felt that way about him, because he felt they should have had more trust and respect for his previous decisions. However, left in a vacuum, we can make up our own story and think about it. So it may be, in that scenario, who could have said, there's some challenges for me in the business at the moment, so if I'm not communicating, don't panic, I will, as soon as I have more information, I'll give it to you. That doesn't necessarily say, dear Lord, we have no money available to us. Okay? It also depends on the person's ability within the business to cope with that, because too much information sharing is scaring. You can create paralysis in somebody who's overwhelmed by that amount of information. So it could be deciding, so that would be part of your rules of engagement, understanding who's capable of taking on that information and who just really doesn't care, because all they need to know is what time they're milking the cows and will they get paid for it. Okay. Brilliant question. So who's in my system, what they need to know, and how might that play out? Rather than coming into the yard screaming, for God's sake, why can't you do as you're told? We've got no money, and etc., and making a big thing out of it and not actually controlling how it happens with that. I have found, and I am a firm believer, because I've had great and positive life experiences, that people are fundamentally decent and typically respond well to somebody investing the time and effort to have those conversations with them. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, if you believe that people are useless, no good, and difficult to manage, and you're always on the back foot, don't employ people. You've set yourself up to fail instantly. Okay? One of the big distinguishing factors between employers of choice and not, employers of choice actually like people. They see people as having value. They feel positively about people. If you really don't like people, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to engage your staff. It doesn't mean you can't do it if that's right for your business, but you are going to struggle all the time. What I would suggest to you in that scenario, if that's your mindset, is that you engage the gratitude research that I mentioned earlier, and you start, instead of dismissing somebody as completely rubbish, look for small wins. So, well, they're absolutely terrible, but they have a nice haircut. Whatever it takes for you to start on that journey, do it. And that will allow you to see value. Every single person is an expert in something. And it might be at making the best cup of tea ever, or it might be at mathematical physics. But every single person is an expert in something. And so when you view people like that, you'll take the time to say, what information can I share with them? And when you treat somebody like an adult, they actually respond as an adult. If we looked at transactional analysis in psychology, how you start the interaction is the interaction you'll receive. So if you looked at something like the PAC model or transactional analysis, which talks about parent, adult, child, if you treat somebody like a child, they'll typically behave like one. If you come out aggressive in a power play as a parent, you're likely to get that back, or else they'll become a submissive or difficult child. Okay? I don't know if that's coming up. I can't remember what's in my slides. Super question, and thank you for it. Any questions online? No? Okay. I move on. I'm conscious I've got 38 minutes to blast out a lot of information, so bear with me. Right. So part of, I suppose the challenge I'm always going to get is, but how can you plan for the unknown? You're not planning for the unknown. You're planning to structure your business so it can cope with the unknown. You're planning to structure your business so you can cope with the unknown. If you're planning for the unknown, nobody would do it. Why would you do it? You don't know what's coming. How can you plan? So what you're doing is you're planning for the fact that there will be turbulence ahead and that you're in a position to cope with that. And we would look at really robust businesses theoretically break their businesses frequently. And what that looks like is, and what if I get hit with very bad cell count? What if I get hit with horrendous calf scour? What if I get hit by floods? What if all my staff leave me? What if I drop dead tomorrow? That's contingency planning. And then I start putting things in place to account for those things. Not to eradicate them or eliminate them, to cope with them. Is everybody with me? I'm always amused at a farmer in Ireland said, well, I tried that planning thing once and I didn't get to silage on the day I wanted, so I didn't bother doing it again. So that's dismissing a very well researched, applied skill set based on one experience. That is foolhardy. Really, really foolish. So what you do is you plan and you fail better the next time. Okay? And you review and you plan again. And you review and you plan again. You're constantly in planning phase. And by the way, you are excellent at this. Really excellent at this. Because you know when you're breeding, you know when you're calving, you know when you're harvesting. You are very, as a cohort, farmers are very good at planning. You just need to apply it more systematically. I mentioned it earlier, skill sets, not transferring skill sets. Not realizing, it talks about the book and the discipline to delay gratification doesn't necessarily apply across all areas of your life. We need to use that skill set you already have and apply it elsewhere. So you are good at this, don't run away from it. Apply it. And if it doesn't make sense to you, think what does it look like in language that you do understand. Okay? Any questions on planning? I will look at this slide. So why do we plan? For every minute spent organizing, an hour is saved, a quote by Benjamin Franklin, attributed with creating public lighting, street lighting, the public library system. Pretty engaged guy, got a lot done in the formative years of the United States. Remains to this day the largest economy. So Benjamin Franklin, for every minute spent organizing, an hour is saved. Communication, what's coming up? Planning and rosters and task allocation, that is planning your staff's workload and communicating with them what needs to be done. What I see in toxic businesses is they do not plan the workload, they do not use that planning as part of the communication tool in the business, and then they punish the staff for not getting enough done or not doing what they thought they should be, what the owner thought they should be doing, but the staff didn't know they were supposed to do it because that wasn't communicated through a plan of work. So everybody just follow that. Okay, got some nods, so yeah, great. Financial benefit. If you leave it till the last minute, you're at the mercy of the last minute merchants and they will charge what they want. Why? Because you'll have to pay it. All right, sometimes you get caught out. Sometimes you buy in advance and there was later down the line you could have got it cheaper. Sometimes you'll get caught and that may make you go, well, I'm not going to plan again because I got caught out that time. But maybe you were just misinformed in how you did that purchase in the first place. Okay? What I would say is a decision made at that point, don't beat yourself up. You gave yourself the best, an informed decision at a particular point, you need to live with the outcome of that. What you shouldn't live with is a spur of the moment reaction. When actually if you'd stopped, thought, act and engaged system one, human brain, not chimp sabotage, and actually stop. So do give yourself a hard time about that. Oh, if only I'd stopped and listened and thought about it. That's when you have a go at yourself. But actually, in a decision taken, a well-informed decision taken at a particular point, don't beat yourself up if that was the wrong decision. Live with it and work out how to fail better the next time. okay? And the reason I say that is that's the difference between perfection and excellence. You cannot attain perfection, it's impossible. It's also extremely self-punishing because you're never satisfied and you're always thinking you could have done better. But striving for excellence allows self-compassion because it allows you to say to yourself, I did the best in the situation I found myself in. That's all I can do. That is a lot easier to live with than haranguing yourself because you made a bad decision and you never had that, and you couldn't have made a better one anyway. Everybody with me? If you've got perfectionists in your business, or you are a self-proclaimed perfectionist, if I was a consultant in your business, I would have you taken out and shot. I would cull you straight away because striving for nothing is perfect. If you're religious, you will say only God is perfect. Humans aren't perfect. We're perfectly imperfect. And so when you strive for that perfection, it becomes very, very damaging. It becomes self-limiting. It becomes a serious bottleneck, and it creates a standard that is absolutely impossible for the people in your environment to live up to. Okay? And you will hemorrhage staff left, right, and centre. And your children won't go farming. And your marriage will be tough, or your partnership will be tough. That's a fact. Because your standards are unrealistic and inhumane. Okay. Right. Legacy, including succession, so we understand that, making sure that all your hard work pays off. People management, of course, planning. Ultimately, at its most basic, when you employ somebody, you're buying the asset of time. Not to structure the time of your staff as the equivalent of burning dollars. It is really an extraordinary idea that people will say, oh, you know, or they'll say to me, oh, really? I've got to plan every minute they're in my business. Yes, you do. You bought the asset of time. Why would you throw that away? But guess what? Your business isn't as complicated as you think it is. There's a huge amount of patterns that happen across, so on a daily basis, farming is unpredictable. On a long-term basis, it is highly predictable. Now, I know you can all throw in climate at me, but they're still probably happening in the same season around the same weeks. Okay? And again, please forgive me if you think I am being dismissive. I do not mean to be. But just challenge your own assumptions, step back and say, I know I've escalated that in my head. Is that real, or is that just my idea of it? Positive self-concept, and this is the big thing, right? So when we look at mere mortals are going to go for the quick wins, they're going to tick off those things on their list. They'll go for the quick, easier, shiny jobs because why? We feel good about ourselves when we complete something. Actually, if we were to look at somebody like Hertzberg's work on motivation, achievement and success are the two key motivators. Because achievement and success come with that lovely, lovely satisfaction of a dopamine hit in the brain. Feel good about yourself, self-confidence, self-image, yay, I achieved something. Planning something and achieving something is very, very motivating. It encourages you to go ahead and do it again. For all of you who avoid work you should be doing, maybe taking on work you like doing and avoiding the stuff you should be doing, understand that humans feel far better about achieving the thing they didn't want to do in the first place than about completing something you're already good at. And I would say in agriculture, that's paperwork. It's far more satisfactory to do a good round of paperwork because it's probably something that isn't your skill set. And so when you do it and you achieve it, you're like, oh, thank God, that's done. Brilliant, I feel great. And yet if you do something really well that you've done for years, you're like, oh yeah, I've just done that again. Okay? So doing something you don't like is going to create a really good positive self-concept. And of course, planning is for stress management as well. Oh, Ken, yeah, please.
That's the benefits of planning for every day. You did mention planning. So planning to structure your business to cope with the unknown.
Yeah.
Is that separate to that, or is it the same as that?
It's the same thing. So the question from the room is, that idea of planning and structuring for the unknown, is that a daily planning concept or is it a long-term planning concept? Is that the question?
This sort of planning sounds tactical. Your planning can be unknown and more strategic, so it's how am
seems like the two, well, in my mind, they feel like they're slightly different, but if they're the same sort of process, so that's what I'm thinking.
So the question is this technical or strategic planning? So you feel sounds more technical than strategic? All technical feeds into strategy. So if we can, technical is probably more likely to happen on a day-to-day basis, but it mightn't. So it could be long-term. They're both. They're interchangeable. So the planning that we apply to future time is the same planning we can apply to near time. Does that make sense? Question here or comment?
So my take home from all of this, leading on from Ken's point, is that whatever you can control that is in your power, to be able to be as efficient as possible and to be prepared and well structured, and in times of crisis or disaster or unplanned activities, you'll have enough in the reserve bank to be able to be resourceful and have the time and capacity to be able to deal with that crisis. Is that correct?
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. So for people listening online, the comment is that I suppose the takeaway from today is actually structuring and planning well on a short-term basis allows you to have capacity for unexpected, short-term and long-term. That planning concept, planning exercise allows you to have stability and robustness for the unknown that you can't plan for. Is that, yeah? Okay, I've got a couple of nods, so we'll take that. How do we do that more formally? So I was actually there just speaking about the benefits of planning, but how do we actually plan? Well, I do a big exercise where I talk about time influences time. Now, if you don't use time well today, then it'll pollute future time. If you invest your time really well today, it will positively impact future time. So one of the problems in farming is very visual. We have very visual information that says, I've had a good day, I'm producing milk, I can see it. And so that concept of planning into something that's unknown, we can't see it. It's difficult to buy into that idea. But in order to practice well today and do those things properly, we have to project into the future and look for those unknown things. And one of the ways we can do that, the way we need to do that is we need to plan long term in order to perform correctly short term. And so for many of you, you will have heard of my discounted planner approach. And that is taking a big picture of time, putting as much information in there as possible to allow ourselves to know what time is available to structure our business properly. And so the steps in that, and I'm not doing that as an exercise here, but the steps in that would be remove the time not available to farming, mark known events in the farming year, and relieve stressed periods in quiet times. So you're getting a big picture of time to allow you to spot the opportunity to embed good behavior, to strategically implement things that will help you to be sustainable on a long-term basis. Is everybody with me? For anybody who hasn't come across that idea, again, I refer you to Dairy Australia's YouTube channel. I did quite a lot of that during COVID. I could pick on Justin in the room, who has actually implemented that idea on farm, and was gracious enough to speak last week to farmers about it, and to in fact invited them to see it, how he's doing it in his business, and they have contacted him. So I'm going to make use of Justin there, and maybe if somebody wanted to know a bit more about that, the advantage of it. Okay, so thanks, Justin. Right, so, and there's plenty of that online. But in the meantime, how do we go about this? Well, we want to prevent drift. And I'm using this idea of drift here because in peace times and quiet times and affluent milk and good weather and cows are thriving, it is easy to let things drift, not to be robust in our planning, and therefore when we do hit a crisis point, we haven't been prepared for it. One of the ways we can reduce drift is by using a very simple concept of task prioritization. So I'll come back to my good friend Stephen Covey, who had looked at the 7 habits of highly effective people. I'm getting nods back there, okay? So this really became mainstream because of his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's often called the Eisenhower quadrants. So General Eisenhower attributed with ending World War in Europe, Second World War in Europe. We can assume he was pretty organized. He had a lot of moving parts that he had to have in the right place at the right time to execute that termination. So let's assume that this does actually work. And actually, I know it works because we use it in practice all the time. And what it does is, like all business models, it takes information and it filters it through a simple model, a simple idea. That's why we use models. We use modeling to allow us to simplify large information. There are other reasons why we do it, but in business, time is money. Let's run a lot of information through something simple. And what we need to ask ourselves is, to prevent drift, is we need to know what our long-term gain is. So I use this in a number of different ways. I would use it for productivity or time management. I use it always for stress management. Okay, I use it all the time for stress management, whether that's a failing business, so the business is stressed, or the individual is in trouble. I would use this model because it's just something that people can actively do. And then the more you practice this idea, and by the way, when we start looking at time management, you will see people who get better at time management and goal setting, you will see structural difference in their neural pathways. So when we come back to somebody who proactively works on all of these things, and you do your functional MRI scanning with your hairnet that's attached to computers, you will see that people who have a very good time management skill will have certain neural pathways that light up doing a task versus the person who doesn't have that skill set. Okay? So we're going to think about how to do this. You might start off doing this formally. I know for AHDB, the equivalent of Dairy Australia in the UK, we physically made this as whiteboards for businesses. And they would write, the idea was they would write down the task, they would put a deadline as to when it needs to be done, and they would put an initial beside it. And that means such a person has to have this job done by such a date. Okay? It is a dynamic model. We're going to start moving things around it. So how do we prevent drift? Well, the most important thing for preventing drift is to know what we're trying to achieve long term. If we are reacting on a daily basis, we will do what's in front of us, and we won't invest any time now to be able to respond in future time. Does that make sense? We're only going to do what's directly in front of us. But if we know a bigger picture of time, then we know that an aspect of today should be spent investing in future time. Is everybody with me? So we have to do our daily work. We have to. Very quickly, in a dairy business, what are the things that you have to do on any day that you have to? They're non-negotiable. What are the things you need to do? And there's very few of them. Milking, feeding, safe. I would say safe. Milking, feeding stock, having them safe. They're really, in a dairy business, all you need to do on any day. Okay? Everything else is a bonus. So I would challenge all of you, at the end of the day, when you hear your head saying, what a useless day I had today, I was absolutely rubbish, I achieved nothing, you stop that negative voice and you say, are my cows milked? Are my cows fed and watered? Are my cows safe? And if you can answer yes to those, at the end of the day you say, well done me, I did what I needed to do. It might have been what I wanted to do, because I wanted to do 50 million other jobs, and I actually set myself up to fail because I was completely unrealistic with the amount of time available to me. Breath. But I did what I needed to do. And what that allows is self-compassion. And that is a very, very powerful concept, because then we stop beating ourselves up. Beating ourselves up when we were always going to fail because we set ourselves up to do so. That is extraordinarily punishing behavior. Okay, how do we do it? Well, first of all, we absolutely know what our important, not urgent thing is, because that's what's driving us forward. We're running every task and we are assigning it based on how important is it and how urgent is it. If it's important, it needs to be done. If it's not important, it doesn't need to be done. Okay, so if it's important, it needs to be done. And then the time factor there is urgent. Is it urgent? It doesn't need to be done now or soon. Okay, so we are running every single task, and this is how you would allocate work across the week to your staff. By the way, allocate work across the week to your staff well in advance, but at least the previous Thursday. Why? Because we know the brain is very good at priming work, and if your staff know in advance what's expected of them, they will come to work ready to work, not waiting to find out what work they need to do. They will come to work aware of how to distribute their energy across the week, and they will apply themselves accordingly. If people are coming to work to find out what they need to do, they have no idea how to distribute their energy. Think of it as fuel. I call it the porridge principle. I don't know how much porridge to eat if I don't know what's ahead of me. I might eat too much or too little. If I haven't eaten enough, I'll be very, very reluctant if I engage my energy inappropriately and I burst out a big amount of work at the beginning of the week, find out that was the easiest day of the week, the following week, I'm going to come in a lot more conservative. And by doing so, I will end up being accused by the employer of having no ambition, no energy, and what the hell happened to me? I was so enthusiastic in the beginning. And that decrease in performance is the employer's fault, not the employee's. Okay? So we're thinking long term. Why do we do it on the Thursday, by the way? Because you've got Friday to sort things out in advance of the following week. Right. Important, not urgent. That can be divided into short term or long term. So important, not urgent are sustainable business. Now, we're working every day to create a sustainable business, but we're not going to actually know if it's been sustainable until future time if we're still alive in the industry. We're still within the industry. So it might be saying to yourself, I want to have had a really good year. So let's say I want 2024 to be an excellent year and to have achieved things in dairy. So that's my long-term point. It's important it happens, but it's not urgent because I won't know till the 31st of December. Okay? That's important, it's not urgent. A great year in dairy 2024. I put a deadline on everything. Not putting a deadline on these things, they become dreams, and if they're unrealized, they become regrets. So we should never talk about ideas without being target focused. The brain is target focused. It wants something specific to track towards. Don't talk about succession. Talk about succession will happen when I am 65 and I hand over, or whatever age you pick, and I hand over control to a person. And that's going to look like this, and this is what I'm going to do when I'm not doing those things. The more information you can give your brain to track towards, the easier it is for the brain to spot opportunities to make that happen and to realize that. Give your brain deadlines. If you want to change something in your system, give it a deadline. We've mentioned it already with a cracking comment from Ken in the room. How the human brain, how do you cope when there seems no end in sight? The reason it is so difficult to cope when there's no end in sight is the brain has nothing definite to track towards. The brain, we know from psychology, is the Zeigarnik effect. So the brain copes better with closed tasks than with open tasks. It is not the things you've done that keep you awake at night, it's the things you've yet to do. It's that open task. Okay, so the Zeigarnik effect. The brain wants things to be finished off. But there's a challenge in that, because that allows you to abuse time. The challenge in it is, but this job will only take 10 or 20 minutes more. I'll just finish it today. I'll just get it done, so I don't have to do it tomorrow. And that's dangerous because that allows drift in the day. So while we know the brain wants a closed task, we need to be careful not to fall into that and therefore abuse time by letting tasks go on longer than they should. Okay? Because of the Zeigarnik effect, that's another reason we know that multitasking is inefficient. Because multitasking means lots of open tasks still. It's like having lots of open things on your computer screen. The brain wants to close those off to feel. So think of your head as a computer screen. It's got lots of information. The more you can close those ideas, the easier it is for the brain to cope. Okay? That's why we know multitasking is inefficient, besides the fact that there's an attentional issue when you swap between tasks. Okay, so this is tricky because I'm speaking right now really about, fundamentally speaking about time management, and I'm under pressure for time, so I better do as I say. Yes? No, my brain said 12:30, and by God, I'm going to 12:30. It's the only way. I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you. What I will say is I'm more than happy to take questions, but in terms of content, I'm going to go 12:30. That's just for my own vanity, if nothing else. Okay, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Right. So I will happily take questions from the room or online, no problem, and continue the discussion. So using this model, very, very effective. What I would say to everybody, we're going to use this as planning. So great question from Ken. This can be used for long-term planning. I would use this a lot in that time of day where there's most drift, and that's between milking. Okay. So I would apply this. This is a model I would definitely apply. Ken, I'll come back to you in a moment. Keep your question or write it down. Okay. So I'm going to batter through this and then I'll come back. Okay. So a number of you have seen me use this already. So we've got our important, not urgent. That's driving us forward. That's what the brain is working towards. Succession, but by when? Losing weight, but by when? Changing a system, but by when? We need to deadline it. We need to deadline it or it won't happen. Okay? Give our brain something to work towards. So always date action and work towards these incentives or these ideas. The next quadrant, so we call that the quadrant of sorry, oh, wrong way. We call that the quadrant of effectiveness. I'll show it to you in a moment. So the top left here is important and urgent, and that is short-term planning. That is what's happening today. It's important, it needs to happen, and it's urgent, it needs to happen now or soon. Now, if, for example, I had a task list of 10 tasks, that is not good enough for the brain. Because the brain will use default mechanisms that make it go after, of those 10 tasks, what's the mere mortal going to go after? Easy. Quick. So it could be easy, but not necessarily quick, but it takes a long time to do, but I don't have to put any brain capacity into it. So easy, quick, what else? I always call them shiny. Easy, quick, or shiny, those seductive jobs that you go, oh, I'd like to try that. I'm a bit fed up now at this time of year doing X job and something new has come along, I'll get distracted into that. That's mere mortals. Okay, but highly effective people, 7 habits of highly effective people do not get seduced by the nice, shiny, or quick. They do the right thing at the right time. So they don't just write the task list, they prioritize the task list. How do I prioritize the task list? I prioritize the task list based on what it is I'm trying to achieve in the important, not urgent. Now we are running this model to account for the time that's not already been allotted. And when I say that, I mean it's the time, so milking has to happen. If I go into a toxic business, like a dairy business that's failing, I actually have to put milking on important and urgent, because people aren't holding hard boundaries, they're letting that slide. And so to get them back on track, we start saying important and urgent in any day is starting milking at this time in the morning and starting milking at this time in the afternoon or evening. And we have to actively put it in there in a business that is struggling. When I say that to other businesses, they're like, what are you talking about? They're dairy farmers. Why do they need to know that as an important and urgent? They need to know it if they're allowing boundaries to slide. Okay? So just because it mightn't be relevant to you doesn't mean that there aren't other businesses who think differently to you. So we're putting in, we've got those hard barriers in place. So this is not about structuring the things that have to be, that are already set play. This is about using, managing the time that you have to plan. And by doing that well, you're going to work towards here. So we've got our list of tasks, of 10 tasks. Given that between milking and lunch breaks, and you're going to finish at a certain time, and last week I looked at the farming day with the group. What we need to think about is, what you need to understand is, on any one day you are unlikely to get past task 3 on your list of 10, but you're living with the knowledge that you've done the 3 most important things to drive your business forward. The quick wins are false economy. We get a quick dopamine hit. The big wins, we get a large dopamine hit and an investment in future time. They are far more valuable to you. Is everybody with me? Really famous book, productivity book, Brian Tracy, Eat That Frog. First thing he did every day was eat a great big ugly frog. The rest of the day would feel quite easy. I have a business, large multi-unit operator in Scotland, and they are constantly talking about frogs because I'm their consultant. They go in, they're like, what frogs do we have today? Oh, I hate that job. That's a horrible job. Okay, let's get it done. Let's crack it out and get it done. And their frog day is Monday. Because if they get all their ugly frogs done on a Monday, the rest of the week feels quite easy. Okay, and they actually use that terminology. What are our frogs? What are our ugly frogs today? Okay, so you're doing 3 tasks. Now, it doesn't mean that the other tasks disappear. It means that what was task 4, bless you, Tanya, what is task 4 today becomes task 1 tomorrow. If, for whatever reason, maybe through poor time allocation or a disruption, I didn't finish task 3 today, I still finish at the time I'm supposed to finish in terms of the day. I don't allow it to slide. I don't go, well, it's only 10 minutes. Let me explain something to you that is very, very important. If you have a default mindset that you hear yourself saying it's only 10 minutes, and you say that once a day across a working year in agriculture, 10 minutes is nothing in isolation, 10 minutes cumulatively is 48 hours, which for employees, and many of you, your employees are working 48 hours. So you have wasted a week of your employees' time. Think of it that way, by having a default mindset of, it doesn't matter if it drifts by 10 minutes. It matters. In isolation, it doesn't. One incident doesn't matter. Lots of small things build up to a sizable amount of time. Okay? And that's only doing it once. What if you're doing it several times a day? Okay. Challenge yourself. Right. So we've listened important. We haven't been seduced by quick, easy, or shiny. We've gone straight for the most important tasks that were contributing towards our long-term goal. For example, what do I need to do today to ensure that 2024 is a successful year? We then have this quadrant down here, which is the quadrant of delusion. So it's not important, but urgent. And that is, what individual would we see in the agricultural industry that makes themselves urgent but is only important if we choose to engage with them? Come on. Who stands in your yard looking for attention? Sales rep, thank you. Somebody, whoever said it. Sorry, sales rep, they're getting a bad reputation here, but the sales rep makes themselves urgent. They only become important if you choose to give them your attention. Remember, when I give something my attention at any one time, I have now shifted my priority list. I have now made that person number one, and there's a consequence. I have to pay for that time spent. Time spent must be paid for. If I spend time doing something I wasn't supposed to do, I will have to pay for it somewhere. Okay? If you do not need the product, don't entertain the sales rep. If, on the other hand, you say, I haven't seen anybody for a long time and it's just nice to be social, fine. If it's your choice to entertain the sales rep, that's your choice, but do not complain at the end of the day you got nothing done. Because you chose for that to happen. Okay? Right. What else do we have? There's one in front of me. Not everybody has one today. I'm impressed. I have no doubt you own it. Oh yeah, everybody goes, yes, correct. Okay, so for the online, everybody, a number of people in the room showed me their phone. The phone is urgent, it's ringing. It is only important if you choose to answer it. Now, if you do not need to answer it, don't. Bin it. So what we're doing with not urgent important is we're going to schedule that, okay? We're going to triage it. We're going to triage it like if we were in an accident, an emergency scenario. If I don't need to answer that phone, don't. Bin it. End it. If I do need to speak to that person, it's important, but it's not urgent, but they happen to be ringing now, don't answer it now, but send a message and say when you can speak to them. I'll speak to you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. One of the good things about not answering a phone is people are usually far more efficient when they leave the message than when you actually answer the phone. Sometimes you answer the phone and they go, oh, I didn't expect you to answer. And you've totally derailed them and they don't know what to say, so that takes even longer. And then if it is somebody that you do need to talk to, firstly, you would be anticipating on any day who's likely to call me today and do I need to take that phone call? So I get this a lot in Ireland. I don't know if you get this here, but I get this a lot. What about when the guy's dropping off the fertilizer and doesn't know what entrance to bring it to? I need to answer that phone. Well, why didn't you give them the proper instructions in the first place? Okay, very sympathetic me, sitting here, very sympathetic. Well, preempt that. Or say to yourself, well, I am expecting that person to ring, so I'll be available to that call. But if you've got lots of unexpected phone calls, the likelihood is that people are ringing you because you answer the phone, not because you're the right person to ring. If your staff are always calling you, it's because you let them. If somebody's always asking you for help, it's because you have allowed that behavior and therefore it continues. Okay? So what we're going to do with not important, urgent, we're going to bin it if we don't need to do it. We're going to reschedule it if it's important but isn't urgent. And if we prioritize it, we live with the fact that by answering that call or speaking to that rep or allowing our energy, allowing our attention to be taken by that thing, that we have now moved that up into number one on the important and urgent, with the consequence that we have now shoved down what was 1, 2, and 3 to 2, 3, and 4, and that we may well not get through what we need to get through. We then need to review it. We need to have the discipline not to go, well, I'll do it anyway because it was on the list, and say, right, shift it back. That no longer, it's still important, but it's not urgent. It's short-term important, not urgent. It becomes number one for tomorrow, and we're constantly moving those. But do not for a second waste time in a quadrant of with tasks that are not important and not urgent. Okay, not important, not urgent. Listening to the opinion of people who do not know what you're doing and being distracted by it. Listening to the opinion of people who do not have your better interest at heart and being distracted by it. Do not do it. Who is this person and what's their relation to me? And don't spend another moment on their opinion if they don't understand your system and their opinion isn't adding value to you or isn't helping you in what you're trying to do, which is also value. Okay? Right. These are very nicely titled Quadrant of Immediacy. It's happening now. If you constantly live in that top left quadrant, important and urgent, you are not a sustainable business. You are a business that is running into serious trouble. At times of year, there will be times when you're in there, but you need to constantly triage that and move things around to create some capacity for breathing space. And breathing space is the opportunity for your business to cope and to settle and to consolidate so that you're able to cope with that disruption when it comes in terms of instability. Okay, it is powerful, that model. When I run that with businesses, they complete their 5-year plan in 3 years, which may suggest that their business plan wasn't ambitious enough in the first place. You're only ever in the first year of your plan because you're constantly reviewing. There is a caveat to this. Because it generates a large degree of success, but I have the arrows there because we're always operating that and running that model for that top right quadrant. Because it generates a huge amount of success, we continuously get dopamine hits and a sense of success and a sense of satisfaction. And it can be addictive, genuinely. It's addictive because we're succeeding. Success is addictive. And so we need to maybe at points realize that we're going into that overproductive mode where we feel anxiety when we're not doing stuff because we're not ticking things off. Does that make sense? So it does come with a warning. It's probably one of the nicer warnings to get. You'll be too successful, slow down, okay? But just be mindful that it can become quite absorbing. Okay, got 1 minute and I don't know what my next slide is. So, sustainable business. A couple of things are up there, and as you're all getting these slides, I will leave these as ideas. So we should be investing in ourselves through self-awareness. Could be emotional control, addressing own weaknesses, self-investment, valuing self as an asset, and maximizing your personal health. That's sustainable. So understanding when you're most productive, looking after your health. Great comment about sleep. Protecting sleep is an investment in yourself. You will be getting all of these slides. Self-compassion. I don't know if any of you are aware of the work of Jordan B. Peterson, can be seen as quite controversial, psychologist, Canadian psychologist. And in his book, The 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, he talks about take the advice you'd give your friend. Okay, so we're very good at giving brilliant advice to our friends. Give yourself the same health treatment you would give your cows. Very quick to call the vet. How many of you ring the GP? Okay. Mental health, realistic expectations, and downtime to decompress. If we are under severe stress, there was a cracking question from the room today from Ken saying, what if it's ongoing and it's in your face and it's there all the time? It's creating those downtimes for yourself. And it doesn't have to be, sticking your head in the sand and running away from it. It could be as simple as, I'm going to take 5 minutes to truly enjoy my cup of coffee. And that's the whole discipline of mindfulness that you'll have come across, meditation. Meditation and mindfulness are different, but employee, so you're investing in communicating ongoing open channels. So this is an investment to be sustainable. We can judge the success of a business on the health of the communication structure within that business. Okay. Advanced planning and warning, so staff can anticipate as much as possible. Again, a great question from Ken. If you're in trouble, how much information do you give your staff? Assess what your staff are capable of taking. I would say err on the side of your staff are adults and are able to take the responsibility. I think that's one of the things I would come across all the time. When we look at accountability, staff like being held accountable. We see that people like being held accountable. They like to know where they stand. That's a correction. Nobody likes telling off. If you hold somebody accountable, you are demonstrating to them that they are worth the time to invest in. I'm not looking at our watch. You're worth the time to invest in, and also that they are adult enough to take the challenge. rather than, well, what's the point in correcting you? You're not going to respond to it anyway, or you're not mature enough to be able to take that. So everybody will take a correction, not a telling off, because the telling off is personal. Motivation, individualized consideration. So who's in your business and what might they need at any point? So I mentioned earlier somebody saying they wanted to remove a commute from their work, and then as they were working longer with that person, they wanted to change their hours so that they were able to do the collection. It was easy for the farmer to do, and it kept a very good member of staff. But it didn't change, so it changed the practices, but didn't change the business objectives or KPIs. Okay. So they weren't compromising business quality for the person. They just shifted some structural things that kept everybody happy. Investment, training opportunities, and valuing a person's contribution, and then progression, working towards autonomy and honouring promises. For the system, we continuously are controlling our cost of production and managing our performance standards, not allowing them to slide. We're simplifying the system as much as possible. The more complicated the system is, the more pressure you'll come under in stressful times, because there's a lot of parts moving. When we can streamline processes, keeping it simple, I'd say to every dairy farm I'm in, you make it as easy as possible for your cows to be milked. They are your primary employee, let's face it. It's a transactional agreement. You feed your cow, she gives you milk. If you apply that mindset to staff, you make it as easy as possible for your staff to do the work, then you're going to have a much, much easier system to run. You're going to have more people bought in. And then because of that success, you'll be able to scale it because you've kept simplicity in it. Invest in up-to-date technologies and current methodologies. I heard yesterday we were discussing where should investment be, and somebody said, well, I didn't go to the people side because the future of dairy may be robotics, because potentially we won't have people coming into the industry. So maybe there's a understanding, is that the right choice for you long term? You should pick that. For me, that's an option that should be right for your business, not as an excuse because you're not good at managing people. Because when that doesn't work properly, you'll start blaming that as well. Okay. And then continuous improvement, ongoing review, and then aggregation of marginal gains. So when you were younger and in your business, or your business was younger, you could see big leaps. You could see big leaps of improvement. There was lots of feedback that gave you a sense of satisfaction. As your business becomes more mature and you become more skilled, you can't see those big jumps. They're not as obvious. And so what you have to chase is you have to chase marginal gains, and you have to somehow make the fine-tuning of your system as enjoyable as the large leaps were. And that might be chasing milk quality or cell count, or retaining, maybe you're struggling with retaining staff, but retaining staff for a month longer than the previous staff, or whatever it is, you're looking for a marginal gain to keep you motivated and incentivized. And that's really important, because for many established businesses, it's not obvious what the gains are, so you've got to seek other ways of motivating yourself. I'm really hoping that's the last slide, because if it's not, it is. Right, in summary, we spoke about the need for resilience, because we are all, regardless of our success as an entity, our effectiveness as an individual, we all suffer from stress. Don't look elsewhere and think, aren't they fantastic and aren't they lucky, and look at all the things they have. Do not compare with others, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Also understand that you don't know who your future self is, and that's a positive as well. So what is bad today, that doesn't have to be the way things are going. Direction, clarity, so looking for what is your why, what will help you to get out of bed in the morning. Don't forget that why is an essential advertising tool when you want to get people into your business, particularly if you expect people to have an agricultural background. If you're targeting somebody with agricultural experience, don't tell them all the minute detail in the ad, what it is you're doing. They know what you do. They're from an agricultural background. They know you milk cows. Tell them of all the dairy businesses they could go to, why they should come to you. Or of all the possible, employment is an opportunity cost, of all the places they could work, why should they pick you? Why? Why should they pick you? Tap into that why. Remember from last night, if you can't articulate what is brilliant about the industry, why you're here, why would anybody else buy into that? And then for a sustainable business, it requires investment. It's very obvious to improve your cows, to improve your systems. it is very important to improve yourself, to improve your staff. Invest in yourself as the best weapon, as the best tool in your business, and you are going to have a huge return on that investment. And thank you very much for your attention today. I appreciate it was a slightly different dynamic, so there are people in the room who have been in my workshops. We usually have a closed door, and that allows us to get stuck into more personal topics, but today was a bit more generic in the sense that there were more than one door there, so there was more than one door there. But I appreciate your patience as well. So my grateful thanks to everybody in the room. I'm more than happy to take questions if anybody has one. If anybody needs to leave, please be a lead cow and stand up and move, because if you don't move, nobody else will. Okay, so by all means, stand up and go if you have to. Okay, Ken has a question. I'm delighted.
I don't want to ask a question if there's other questions. That's a whole question. Back to the planning, sorry.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people don't write plans down, they get them in their head.
Okay.
Which probably is good, but I don't know, what's your thoughts? In your head or writing down? A lot of people say, oh, I did a plan and went to draw and then we'll do it again. So it's disadvantages of writing it down.
Okay, so planning, the question is about planning and what's better, written down or in your head. The ultimate in leadership is to become obsolete. If you have the plan in your head, you cannot remove yourself from the business. It has to be extracted from your head somehow. Okay, this is really, really important. Nobody else can complete the work or do it for you if you can't get it out of your head. And I've spent a number of years, one of the reasons I do the discounted planner is it's a visual representation of the farm. It's something that farmers buy into because it's visual, and visual is farmers are visual because they work in a visual environment, but actually humans are visual, 80%, their brain is 80% wired to visual information. You need to get it out. If you want your system, anybody that, if the system is centralized to a certain person, that person's actually toxic for the business. Because if something happens to that person, the business collapses. Now that is a huge mindset shift, because when you go to somebody and you say the ultimate in leadership is to become obsolete, their automatic judgment of that statement is, so I need to be useless and not contribute. I don't mean that at all, but obsolescence means that it allows you the opportunity to remove yourself without the business collapsing. And that allows you to go on holidays, it allows you to be in this room, it allows you to extract value from your business, because we're working hard every day, we should be able to extract value, but you can't do that if the work isn't being done behind you. So if the dairy industry was striving for guilt-free leisure and guilt-free work time, we would have I think I work across all sectors, and of course I'm incredibly biased because I come from a dairy background. I come from a dairy background where 3 of the 4 children would happily have gone into dairy. And I'm a service provider to the industry, so I'm definitely still there. The 4th, my older brother never had any interest in it, even as a child. That was just a preference. So I think that's a pretty good conversion rate from my parents. And that's because of the ability for us to enjoy what was happening in the business. And so we need to be able to leave, if we want succession, sustainability is the ability to pass on that information so the work can happen in our absence. So we have to get it out of our heads. Why don't we? For the vast majority of farmers, they don't know how to get it out of their heads. Okay? So I had a group. So how do we do that is a cracking question. You pay me a lot of money and I help you. No, I'm joking. Now, how we do that, and it's really simple, and again, this is all online. I do these groups a lot, and you'll have partners, business partners, life partners come into the room, and somebody who has a lot of information, because they have a lot of information, they don't know where to start. Like what I mentioned yesterday, legendary campaign, 170 skills, a dairy farmer's over 170 skills. Where on earth am I going to start? And so what I've started to do, and this is why I found it fascinating yesterday when I said a triadic system of cow, system and people, and people in the room said, you can't separate those. You have to separate those. You have to. Because if you want to impart skills to other people, you have to be able to group them and get those and separate and clean that up. I don't have it here, but I would so I started off doing that. So 172 skills, God, where would I start? And so I had always used the 3 cow people. I've now got pie, slices of pie within each of those. And so when I'm doing the discounted planner, which again is online, I have categories there, so it allows people to extract that information. And what it'll end up being is in a room they'll say, when do you start? So calving, tell me all about calving. Now this is really clean in a block system where they can say, well, I start calving in Ireland the 1st of February and we're pretty much finished by the 17th of December, St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so, okay, tell me what else, what do you need to be able to calve well? Well, we need colostrum, we need this, we need that. Okay, when do you need those by? And you start filling those in. So farmers are very good at telling you information if you ask, but they won't just volunteer it, because where would you start? Okay. So you just systematically, or you might say to yourself, I'll take one category, which is calving, or I'll take 1 month. What do I do in a month? Categories are actually easier, because then you can follow that and see that through. What else works really well? So we're getting that out on what's really valuable about that is farmers start to appreciate how much work they do themselves. They start to appreciate how unrealistic it is to sustain that. Okay, and they start realizing that staff are a huge asset to my business because they are taking workload from me to allow me to pursue other things. So it's a really, really one of the best ways for employees in agriculture to appreciate their staff is to be able to get it all out of their head and see how much is on their plate, realize how unrealistic it is to do it as their scale increases, and then to impart that information. So having given you a long-winded answer, the easiest answer is go online and have a look with Dairy Australia, the discounted planner approach, and it just allows you to systematically work through that. And it's an exercise I quite often do in workshops in Australia as well. Great question. Simone.
I'm interested in that you talked about you had your team meeting on Thursday.
Yes.
And I think it's something that we've probably tried to advocate for in Australia. You know, we talk about the need for a toolbox meeting once a week, and it covers up on a bunch of things because it covers up on all the tasks and priorities for the week. It covers up on safety. It gives people the opportunity to say the quad bike, the brakes are not working very well, so it gets, you know, the idea is it gets taken out, it gets repaired, you know, it's elevated. But I know, you know, it's generally more a Monday or a Friday thing because it's either a reflection on how the week goes, what's left to tick into next week, or on Monday, like, let's keep the week off, let's get going.
Yeah.
I think that
So that's just a habit. And if you want it to be the Thursday, you make it a Thursday. So firstly, in the businesses you work in, regardless of the money you're making, you are small in terms of the number of people in the business. I would say when I'm talking about on the Thursday, that is a planning session where you're allocating the following week's work. It's not necessarily a meeting for staff. Because you're smaller businesses, you should be, a week could be a week too late to deal with something. So as smaller businesses, you have the opportunity to interact on a daily basis with your staff. When we look at review processes or any of our weekly meetings have been abandoned wholesale, I would say, for quite a few years in other sectors, because they're quite a public sector idea. Agriculture, in terms of its business processes, is quite often more aligned with public sector than it is with private sector, and maybe that's something to do with, I don't know. But in that scenario, you're speaking to staff, or you have your WhatsApp, or you have whatever, which means on a daily basis you're really going, any issues today, or they know they can contact you because there was an issue. So you might be, so it shouldn't be first of all, the Monday is too late because people are coming to work not knowing what to expect of them. You're not making the best advantage of the human brain, which is a concept called incubation or priming. So when you're asleep, so the most productive brains are sleep and daydreaming. And that's because you're allowing, so daydreaming, people, when you say that, they assume that you're just daydreaming, but actually daydreaming could be when you're cleaning the dairy, driving somewhere, driving the tractor, you know, you're doing a routine task and it allows your brain to wander elsewhere and you come up with all your best plans. It might be when you go out for your run because that's what you like doing. So by giving people advance warning of what is required, their brain solves that issue for them. They come to work ready to work. And by doing it on a Thursday, for anybody who spots an issue that could potentially arise the following week, they've got the Friday to cope with it. Because most workplaces are going to match. Like I talk about Friday because, realistically in any business, if you as a dairy business, of course you're a 7-day-a-week business, but it doesn't mean you should not be flat out 7 days a week. And ideally, if you can match the civilian world, okay, so the non-dairy world, if you can match the outside world and go for a lighter weekend, you make yourself more competitive. Of course, it's not like the work disappears. If you want to have a light weekend or a skeleton weekend or bare essentials, then that work has to be accounted for somewhere. So it has to be filtered back into the week somewhere. Okay. So the meeting one, I would say for the businesses I work with, meetings are more likely to be a source of frustration than of productivity. You're in the scales you're in, unless you're in very large people systems, the scales you're in, you're probably able to access people regularly and find out how they're going on a daily basis. Simple questions. What's going well? What could go better? What do you need for next week? What do you anticipate happening? Is it ready and is it available? In the meantime, you're set up for next week because through planning, you knew that you were going to spend next week fencing, and therefore in advance, you have bought the stakes and the wire and everything else that you need because you're planning. Now, if you wait till next week to go fencing without thinking about it in advance, you'll allot an amount of time to go fencing and not have any of the things available to you, and therefore you don't have that amount of time to go fencing. You've only that amount of time to go fencing because you spent a lot of the time preparing for it. So we're anticipating events in advance so that we're prepared for them. Of course, a little bit like Ken's question from the room, we can't plan everything, or how do we plan for those things? You're making sure that what you can control is completed so that it isn't what causes pressure when there's other stresses on. Answer? Yeah. Just because it happens on Monday and Friday, your meetings, because you allowed them to. Simple as that. Okay, so if you see a different day as being a better option, implement that as today's the first day of the rest of your life. Hello staff, from now on we're going to meet on a Thursday to discuss what's coming up next week, or I'm going to assign your workload on a Thursday so that you have an opportunity to review it before we run into trouble next week. Okay. Any other questions? Great question, thanks Simone. I don't know if I'm below or probably under the camera now at this stage.
Simone's about meetings. Most of us are in small teams, 4 or 5 type people.
Yep.
Every day of the week I have a staff member not at work based on their roster.
Yes.
One person's not there. You've encountered that elsewhere. What's probably not comfortable asking people to come in on their days off to come to a meeting. But what's the best way to cover everyone? Do we have meetings on different days, on alternate weeks? Certainly when we've tried in the past, people feel left out, but they don't necessarily want to come in on the day off for a meeting.
Okay, so the formality of the meeting is what's causing the problems there, because people feel they're missing out on an event. But if you're naturally communicating with people every day, nobody feels missed out.
Yeah.
So the meeting one is interesting. I'm not entirely sure why you have a meeting.
Yeah.
What I would say to you is have a method of capturing information so that when somebody isn't there, they still that's still there and available to them, which is probably going to look something like a whiteboard. What came up and put it up there. So rather than looking for this kind of formal meeting, just communicating with everybody frequently, or it doesn't have to be all the time. And also be mindful that if you've got somebody who's very capable in the business, they may well feel micromanaged. Be also mindful that just because you've got 4 people who are very capable and don't want to be micromanaged, but you've got 1 person who's new to the business, that they can't be ignored. So we're thinking about who the people are in the system and how often they need to be communicated with. But if you've got a system where somebody communicates to you that they feel left out, that's a robust system because somebody felt they could say that to you. At which point you say, how often do you want me to speak to you? But please do not contact people outside of their working hours. It is a really dirty habit. To the extent that there are many, like in Portugal, businesses of a certain size, it is illegal to contact your employees outside of their contracted hours. And that's going to come in everywhere. In the Irish employment law, we call it the right to disconnect. I am so pleased to hear it. One of the things I really particularly like about Australia is you have got very, very set employment law. That is brilliant because there's no option. Having no option is much easier than having option because you don't have decision paralysis then. So what you have with hard employment law is creating rules of engagement. You know exactly where you stand. Do not contravene those rules of engagement because that will be flagged very, very quickly by your staff. So I, first of all, take spirit in the fact that somebody felt comfortable enough to. Some people want to go to meetings, they just like being communicated with. There could be personality difference. They feel isolated if there isn't communication. And the next person's gone, oh God, meetings. And that is the problem with a room like this. So a room like this may well accuse other people of not being interested in the industry because they don't sign up for meetings and events. Can be a personality preference not to go to meetings and events. So advisory will always have to be done on an individual and group basis. There is no way around it. It's the same with the processors. They'll come to me and say, why is it always the same farmers? Because they're the farmers that like coming to events. And it's followed up with, oh, it's the farmers who aren't here that need to be here. We don't know that. You don't know anything about the farmer who isn't here because they're not here. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that answers it, Andrew. Okay, come back to it. It's going to probably end up being a group chat that the person can tap into or not tap into on their day off.
When we're implementing change, formality is really good. Someone hates being told in the dairy, and we want to change this. Whereas if we can set aside time when you're not working, we're not expecting, so that's our tension.
So I'm panicking. Did you say if you tell? What did you say about the dairy? If you tell it to somebody in the dairy?
If you speak to someone in the dairy, yeah, exactly.
He didn't say it. Please tell me he didn't say it. The two worst places you can speak to staff in your business. Two worst places you can speak to staff in your business. Give them to me. Dairy and breaks. So your canteen or your cafe or whatever. Why the dairy? First of all, we're definitely going to the dairy because it's easy for me. Captive audience, can't run away. Woohoo! Easy for me. Emotional intelligence does not say easy for me. Emotional intelligence stops and says, how does it play out for the other person? Why do we go to the dairy? Captive audience. What's wrong with going to the dairy? We have to raise our voice. And even if we're telling our staff, we love them dearly, that raised voice signals a threat to that person. And what do the cows do? And pedal and pan, get upset, and then you talk louder. And I can tell you from experience, working with farms, and they bring me and say, come on in now, we'll go into the person in the dairy, and you can see them set their jaw, and they just turn and look at you and go, hello, and you know they want to punch their owner in the face, the business, the employer. Noise, easiness for one party, but frustration for the other. It's just loaded in so many ways that are wrong. Canteen, or break time, the hint, the fact is in the title of that period of time. It's a break. People are entitled to switch off. I would also say I remember having a proper arm wrestle with somebody in Western Victoria, and she was really frustrated because she'd catch her staff on their way from breakfast, from milking to breakfast, and be really frustrated that the member of staff hadn't followed up on what was said. And of course it was loaded straight away because, as we said earlier, hunger has created my incapacity to listen, to retain what you're saying. I'm also resentful because I'm going, could you not have caught me at a different time? Because I've been up all hours milking your cows and now you won't let me get to my breakfast. So we need to think it through. How might it play out for the other people? However, you don't have to cripple yourself into inaction because you're so worried about what your staff are thinking about you. If you very clearly set out your rules of engagement, the standards you expect from the very beginning. The challenge now is that many people are retrofitting. What I would say to all of you is, today is the first day of the rest of your life. Bring it home and say, so it might be Simone's question, bring it home and say, from now on, we are going to have, that work's going to be allocated on a Thursday, or maybe Andrew's saying, I'm going to speak to you at a certain time every day, and I happen to speak to one person at this time because it suits them, but I'm going to speak to the other person at this time because it suits them. And people are like, you do have to be ahead of this because people do get put out for the silliest of reasons. But the main reason is in motivation, it's called equity, so a sense of fairness. It's not fair. You're speaking to that person more than you speak to me. And they start putting value judgments in there. So we need time and space to manage people well. By managing people well, we are creating a sustainable model for our business. Good questions. Anybody else?
And messaging staff and all that, do you know of any app like we use, there's different apps that everyone uses, WhatsApp and the like, but is it, I know with emails you can schedule send an email, so you're not disturbing staff outside work hours. Do you know of any communication apps such as WhatsApp that you can do?
That allow that? Do you know what? It's a good point, because of course people feel obliged to look at the message, and your staff might often say, I don't mind, I like looking at it, and if they choose to say that, then it's quite difficult to go around it. One of the better ways to do it that I have seen work has been using something like Google Documents, where information goes into that document, and then you don't have to you consciously look at that document rather than it coming up as a notification all the time. So I've seen that work quite well, where people are filling information into that document, and that is something that you have to consciously access rather than it's there in the background like WhatsApp sitting there. So it's tricky. It's what works. Suppose I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is whiteboards work all the time, passing on information, and you put it in the place, the least path of resistance, a path of least resistance. So you make it as easy as possible to find that information. Whiteboards continuously, despite technology and smart apps and everything. Another good one is, you saw my urgent and important quadrants. There's a number of companies who run that as an idea, and then you can say it's done, or you can put things and people can move stuff around it. But again, the nice thing about something like that is you have to access the app rather than it being like WhatsApp, where all these information comes up. So, yeah. Okay, great question. I think we'll. Okay, are we happy to leave it there? So, okay, thank you very much everybody for questions and your attention.